Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. We're going to get started. Well, good evening. What? Good evening. At this time, we're going to get the meeting started. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting on Tuesday, April 15th at 6 p.m. And the first item on the agenda is public comment for any members of the public who'd like to speak to any item not on the agenda. Seeing no speaker cards. And if there's anybody who wants to speak to any of the agenda items, or during public comment, we have speaker cards on the table that we just ask that you fill out and then pass on up to us. So can we take the roll?
Berman.
Here.
Hurt. Holman.
Here.
Niss. 3 present.
Thank you very much. And it looks like I jumped the gun. Now is the item for oral communications. So if anybody from the public would like to speak to any item not on the agenda, seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 1, which is adoption of a resolution amending utility rate schedule D1, storm and surface water drainage, reflecting a 2.6% CPI rate increase to $12.30 per month per equivalent residential unit for fiscal year 2015. Does staff have a quick report or presentation?
Very quick, yes. Good evening. My name is Joe Teresi. I'm a senior engineer with the city's Public Works Department, and as you noted, the item before you is seeking endorsement of a resolution that would increase the storm drainage rates for fiscal year 2015 by 2.6%, which reflects the increase in the consumer price index for the Bay Area for last year. This applies across the board to residential and commercial rates. For a typical single-family homeowner, it would result in an increase of 31 cents per month on their utility bill. And this request is in conformance with a 2005 ballot measure wherein a majority of property owners voted to increase their rates for storm drainage. And that ballot measure included a provision that the council could, at its discretion, increase the rates annually by the rate of inflation. So that's my presentation. I'm here to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. And Councilmember Holman.
Yes, 2 questions. One, just a little housekeeping item, because the resolution references the attachment as D11, but what's attached is D1. So just a clarification on that, please.
Well, I would clarify at the bottom, it actually is labeled as sheet D-1-1. On the attachment that you're referring to, it's talking about schedule D1, but sheet D1-1, which is just
Okay. Thank you for the clarification on that.
pagination of the
right.
attachment. Yeah.
Thank you. I went for the obvious, and it wasn't so obvious. And then the other question that I have is, it's not as obvious that commercial, industrial, institutional, multifamily, residential properties rates are increasing, but they are to the same rate of residential. But my question is, it says, say for instance for commercial industrial, that it's 1.0 ERU for each 2,500 square feet of impervious surface on the parcel. Have we ever looked at seeing if that's really equitable for, let's say, for instance, larger research park properties? Have we ever looked to see if that's equitable? And could that be amended at some point in time or not if we find it isn't equitable?
Well, I believe it is equitable. At the time that the Storm Drain Enterprise Fund was created, a study was done, and the rate is based on the typical amount of impervious surface that's on a residential parcel, and that was found to be 2,500 square feet. So that's our billing unit, right? So if an average home is billed this 1 ERU unit, that's based on the assumption that it has 2,500 square feet of impervious surface. So if a commercial property has twice that, then they're billed twice the amount. So it's based on how much runoff is coming off each property.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. And appreciate the background. And you know what? Maybe that would be helpful just for next year. Just kind of, you won't be here for the next 10 years, probably. It might be helpful to include that in the staff reports going forward. It's just a little thing, but it's help. It's educational.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll go ahead. I'm assuming there was one. So I'll go ahead and move that the Finance Committee recommend that Council adopt the attached resolution, Attachment A, amending utility rate schedule D1, storm and surface water drainage, to implement a 2.6% rate increase, increasing the monthly charge per equivalent residential unit by 31 cents from $11.99 to $12.30 for fiscal year 2015. Thank you. So moved by myself and seconded by Councilmember Holman. All in favor? Aye. No opposed. And we'll move that be put on consent calendar for the council. Thank you. I'll check the time. We're okay by a minute. So moving on to agenda item number 2, which is recommendations on proposed fiscal year 2015 community development block grant funding allocations and the draft fiscal year 2015 annual action plan. And would staff like to give a presentation?
Thank you very much, Councilmember Berman. Stephen Turner, Long Range Planning Manager. To start off the presentation, I'll introduce Consuelo Hernandez. She's our Senior Planner in charge of our Community Development Block Grant Program. She'll give an overview of the program and the funding requested for this year, and then I'll follow it up with a brief overview of our pilot year Micro Enterprise Assistance Program. So, Consuelo.
Thank you, Stephen. Good evening, Chair Berman, members of the Finance Committee. As Stephen mentioned, tonight we bring before you the fiscal year 2015 CDBG budget and the draft fiscal year 15 annual action plan. The City of Palo Alto receives funding annually from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development as an entitlement city under the program. CDBG is the principal federal program that provides grants to improve physical, economic, and social conditions primarily for persons of low and moderate income. In order to be eligible for the funding, the city is required to adopt and prepare a 5-year strategic plan outlining the strategies that it's going to undertake to address the needs in the city. In May 2010, the city adopted the 2010-2015 consolidated plan to address these priority housing and community development needs. A 1-year action plan is required outlining the activities the city will undertake during that year, and that's the item that we have before you tonight. Currently, the CDBG program operates under a 2-year funding cycle, so last year we brought you the first year of funding, and now funding recommendations are required for fiscal year 15. So in your report, if you can take a look at attachment A, that summarizes the funding that we're proposing to use for fiscal year 15. The budget is comprised of 3 sources of funds, which is grant program income, entitlement grant funds directly from HUD, and prior year resources. On March 19th, 2014, the city received its final funding allocation amount from HUD of $433,933. It's about a 7.1 reduction over the current year allocation of $467,000. Contained in the staff report, and we hope that it wasn't too confusing, one of our attempts is to make the program a lot more transparent and really put out there what funding the city receives. So we included all of the amount that's available in the city's federal line of credit. But of that $700,000 that's available, we're only asking you to allocate $673,416. And if you look at that spreadsheet at the very top, we identified the 2 statutory spending caps that are required under the HUD regulations. The first is for the public service activities, which are similar to the HISRAP activities that we fund. Those are capped at 15% of the entitlement grant and 15% of actual program income. And while we have this extra $100,000 that we could put towards a project, we can't put that towards those public service activities, unfortunately, by statute. And just to give you a comparison, in the current fiscal year, we're funding about $103,000 towards public services. For next year, we're looking at $95,320. And we really tried to reduce the impact of the reductions in the allocation that the city received and place 2 primary. The HRC identified 2 specific needs amongst those applicants, which is the Opportunity Center and the SRO Resident Support Program. The other spending cap is placed on administrative-related costs, which is staff time, and we also included the Project Sentinel for the services that they provide to our residents within that cap. That's the only type of public service activity that we're allowed to put under that 20% admin cap. And again, to give you a comparison, the current year we were funded for $105,960 for this. We're asking for an additional funding of about $8,000. Our 5-year strategic plan is up, and we have to prepare that along with an analysis of fair housing impediments. And the cost for the consultant, that's what we're asking for the additional funding to cover that. The economic development funding category doesn't have a spending cap, and so you'll see that those two activities are proposed to be funded at the maximum cap. And then I'll hand it over back to Stephen to provide you with a brief summary of the accomplishments of the Microenterprise Assistance Program, and then I will conclude with the recommendations for tonight's item.
Great. Thank you, Consuelo. So last year, the City Council approved a very unique program that Palo Alto has not undertaken before related to economic development. We had a sense actually for a long time that the city would like to start a microenterprise assistance program, but due to other needs of the program and city staffing, we just weren't able to put the amount of time and resources that were available to starting a microenterprise assistance program. After we brought Consuelo on, we did have those resources, and we were able to use an opportunity where we didn't have a lot of capital projects going on in this past fiscal year that would normally take up resources, and be able to devote those staff resources to the microenterprise assistance program. So council approved an allocation of $150,000 for that program, and we really appreciated that amount, especially because we didn't have the program fully thought out yet. It was a sense that we wanted to start a program and really have it very innovative for the city, but we didn't have a lot of the framework set yet. But council took a chance and allowed us to develop a pilot program with the goal of funding one grantee within this year. I'm really happy to report that we are funding 6 grantees, and we have an award ceremony that's happening this Thursday to honor those 6 grantees. But throughout the process, we have been so very pleased with the amount and level of support that we received both from the council, from our community partners such as the Downtown Streets team and the Palo Alto Housing Corporation, the number of applicants that were interested in this program. We had quite a few number of applicants that we weren't ultimately able to fund, but the level of interest from the community in participating in the program was much greater than we anticipated. We also received a lot of support from the business community. We established a business roundtable to help guide the development of the program and ultimately review the applications and helps us make the decisions for grant funding. And it was just so surprising and just so really warming to get that level of support from the business community. They really are very supportive of what we've been doing and are anxious to continue this on for a second year. So as part of this budget, we are asking for an additional $150,000 for funding for the upcoming fiscal year, and council will be receiving a report from city staff on May 5th as an informational item to go over in more detail what we have learned over this past year for the pilot MAP program and how we intend to learn from this past year and to improve the program for next year. So I'll hand it back to Consuelo.
Thank you, Stephen. So now we'd like to mention our staff recommendations, and staff recommends that the Finance Committee recommend that the City Council take the following actions. 1, allocate CDBG funding as recommended in the draft 2015 action plan and as described in this report, specifically Attachment A. Authorize the City Manager to execute the 2015 CDBG application and 2015 action plan for CDBG funds, any other necessary documents concerning the application, and to otherwise bind the city with respect to the applications and commitment of funds. And 3, to authorize staff to submit the 2015 action plan to HUD by the May 15th, 2014 deadline. That concludes the staff report. We're available to answer any questions, and I know that there's a few members of a few of our public service agencies that are here that might want to speak.
Great. Thank you very much. And before I turn it over to colleagues for questions and comments, we have just one speaker for this item, which is Mr. Philip Daw. And am I correct, you want to speak to 2 and 3, right? Is that correct? Yeah. Okay, great. So you have 3 minutes for 2.
Thank you very much. My name is Philip Dye, and I am the director at the Opportunity Center for Envision Shelter Network. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for the support that you've been giving us. Our work at the Opportunity Center is difficult, and as difficult as it is, we are making a lot of improvements by making a lot of the homeless folks' lives better. In the last 3 months alone, one of my caseworkers has housed 3 chronically homeless people from Palo Alto into sub-master lease apartments in Redwood City. And so those folks are off the street and are receiving support services from the staff as well. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over to colleagues. Any? Yeah, please go ahead. Councilmember Holman.
Yeah, thank you for the report. And I guess my questions really focus on the microenterprise assistance program. So last year there was an allocation of $150,000. There's a request for another $150,000. Unless I didn't catch it in going through here, I didn't catch that $150,000 had been spent or was being spent in the current fiscal year. So that's one question. I'm going to throw out a couple of 3 questions at once and you can answer them. I think to be educational to council members and the public, it'd be good to know what the parameters are. They're referenced in attachment 2B that talk about the program itself. It'd be good to see what the parameters are. What kinds of applications that you got or that you're interested in. If there's a mentoring program that goes along with this. I also didn't see what, and again, help me if I overlooked it, but under MAP cohort, I didn't see what cohort meant. What is cohort? What are cohort members? It's with a capital C, but I didn't see what that is. So I'll leave you with those questions for the moment. Oh, and one more question, if you would. The range of $1,000 to $15,000 for the funding. Just educate us a little bit about how this came about in the way that it's presented here, and then fill in some blanks, if you would, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Holman. I'm not sure if it's on. Great questions, and a lot of those will be answered in the informational report that is going to Council on the 5th. And we were still working on the details of our staff report, and that's why the attachment B is very limited in what we provided. But we have not spent all of the $150,000 that was allocated last year. We've committed about $69,000 of that. And no worries. And staff, as part of our budget preparation last year, we identified 3 kind of line items for the program: personnel cost, technical assistance, and direct grants. Of the $150,000, no more than $36,000 could be spent on personnel cost. Right now, we've spent about $20,000 towards personnel cost, and about $5,000 in the technical assistance, and the sum of the 6 grantees is about $38,000. So that's kind of what you'll see in the report for the May 5th date. We're also hoping to line up 3 additional workshops for the 6 applicants that we're calling our MAP grantees. And the parameters of the program, and what you'll also find in your informational report on May 5th, is a flyer that was produced outlining those parameters, the purpose and intent of the program. Within the summary of the report, you'll also see that we define what MAP cohort is and the reason why we chose that approach. Essentially what it is people tend to learn better in groups. And so we found that by creating a cohort or a group of people that have similar interests in starting a business, they could feed off of each other and learn. And it was really powerful to see them come together and motivate each other. We held a hopes and dreams exercise that was led by the Palo Alto Housing Corporation in December, where applicants or potential applicants got together to share their hopes and fears in establishing their own business. So that goes into a little bit more detail in that report. The other thing in the report that you'll also find is 4 parameters for evaluation questions. Did we hit our target population? What What should the range of grants be? You know, we set this 1,000 to 15,000 limit as the pilot. We did an extensive amount of research for the first 2 months of the year, of the fiscal year. We looked at Field, which produces a lot of the material for micro enterprise development, and it was based off of that, a conversation that staff had with Nova, who launched a similar program 2 years ago. So it's all of those elements that kind of shape this pilot, and that's also going to help inform the future of the program. Of course, if the Finance Committee and the City Council votes to allocate additional funding for next year. And the other thing, the types of projects that we got, they ranged, and when you look at the applicants that we funded for the 6 applicants, one is a stylist, one is an umpire. He has his independent umpire business. We have people that do crafting, arts. We have a gentleman that produces online websites, and the grant amounts range, and we're hoping that that will help within a year, help us evaluate the success of those individuals as well.
Thank you. And mentoring?
I apologize. That was also part of the business, our MAP grant review committee. A subcommittee of that general group served as mentors. So each one of our 11 eligible applicants that were placed on an eligibility list were assigned a mentor, and the mentor helped them in the development of their business plan and their application for funding. So one of the things that we're looking at for next year is expanding that mentorship program and maybe open it up to more business members that are interested in this and serving in that capacity.
So I think just 2 more questions. Since we can't start the next item until 6:50. So I won't ask any personal questions to take up that time. The timing, so we're getting this and looking for approval now, but we're not getting the information report until afterwards. So you understand the juxtaposition of, so I take it there's a rationale or a reason for that, or a requirement that it has to be that way?
Well, certainly we do have to meet federal regulations for the action plan for the coming year, and we feel that the success of the program, just in the way that we've been able to operate it and the grantees that we are able to award grants to, really gives us a sense that we'd like to try to continue and further better and improve this program for the next year. I think Consuelo can speak a little bit about, since we didn't spend all $150,000, kind of what's happening with the balance, and I think that's going into a kind of a reserve fund for the next year. But I think the report that you'll be getting on the 5th just goes into more kind of some detail about what we learned and what we'd like to improve upon. But we think that through the success of the program and having 6 grantees, with the support of the business community, with our partner groups, we'd like to try it again and continue our kind of our development of this program.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, but is there a reason why the information report is coming afterwards? I understand the date and the timing requirements of this, but is there a reason that we didn't get, for purposes of information, it's an information report, and also for purposes of transparency, is there a reason that we didn't get that before this or with this?
Yes, and I can clarify. Thank you, Councilmember Holman. We did not review the applications for grant funding until middle of March. The staff report that you're reviewing tonight was actually prepared before that. So the way that the sequencing of the tasks that we have to prepare, the items that you see tonight, the attachments, all of that is prepared about a month in advance. And because of our review process, there's no, we can provide you with estimates of what we think, ahead of time, but we really wanted to take the time to provide you with accurate data, and that's what the report on the 5th provides you with. Specific numbers. It gave us a little bit more time to look at start to think about evaluation questions and what the future of the program could be, and that's why you're not seeing more details tonight's meeting. And also because of our timeline and the way that CDBG works, we have to have a meeting within a certain time frame in order to submit our application.
Understand that, yeah. Okay. Last question, I'll pass it on here. Downtown Streets team, has there been any nonprofit that's been more successful than Downtown Streets team? The Housing Corp might challenge that a little to some extent, but in terms of ramp up and how successful they've been, just amazing entrepreneurial group. You mentioned the Housing Corp, and they had been very, very helpful with this, so maybe your information report can reference how much the Downtown Streets team has been involved in this program. And then the other is, the one question though is, from where are you drawing your applicants? Is it a citywide appeal, or is it through the Housing Corp, or how are you drawing your applicants? And I'll stop there.
Sure. Our initial thought was within the approval that we brought to you last year, we established a target group, which is low and moderate income individuals and families. And we used Palo Alto Housing Corp and Downtown Streets team to partner with them, since they also receive CDBG funding. They're familiar with the parameters of the CDBG program. So we decided to partner with them and initially only outreach to members that they serve, whether it be people that live in Palo Alto Housing Corp, people that receive services through the SRO program. That was our initial approach. But after meeting with the business community members in a forum, they advised staff to really open it up to the general community, and that's what we did. We posted a flyer online, and we didn't want to be too overwhelmed with applications coming in, especially because it's a pilot. So we didn't put anything in the paper, but we had a news feed on the city's website and then sent it out to our different partners in the community. And we received 26 pre-applications. Of those 26, half were from the general community, not from our target population. Some of them eventually did qualify based on the income. So and that was one of the great things about the program, and not having it so set in stone. It allowed the flexibility to have a variety of applicants. And really, we think that's why the program succeeded this first year. I hope I answered the question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the report. First, you had mentioned that we'd had a real favorable response from the business community, and that was more in the selection process, or how did they participate?
We made a call through our economic development manager to look for essentially volunteers that would be interested in serving on a roundtable, who could help advise staff on the development of this program, to serve as mentors, advisors, and to ultimately review applications that have come in. We received quite a large number of folks who participated with us in the early development of the program, and I think, Consuelo, how many members were on our team before that? About 10 members. But at that very first meeting, when we essentially pitched the idea of a microenterprise program and how it could be developed, we received such an enthusiastic response, including statements like, how can I donate money to this program?
And what did you say to that?
We said, we would love to. We'd love to get more. In fact, I think the long-term goals of this program is to get it out of the city's hands and put it into the hands of an organization that can do so much more than what the city can. Certainly create more funding opportunities, opportunities for additional business involvement. The city can only do so much, but we kind of want to develop the program and get it to a point where it could be self-sufficient, and then hand it over to somebody to do so much more. We think that could probably happen within the next 2 to 3 years.
So I'm glad to hear that. It answered one of my questions, because I think that this kind of entrepreneurial program is something that would resonate well with the business community, and you've already seen that response, and I think you've seen on the two aspects that where their contributions could be was in the mentoring and selection, and then potentially in financial contributions. I think we should begin the discussion next year or maybe early next year, on how we might want to give the program its own legs, whether it's a vision of turning it over, or whether it's something of matching funds. I think that business communities really like that concept often, that they'll get a 2 for $1 for their contributions, and that it's a partnering. And I think it's a great concept of a public and private partnership when you do that financially, rather than just say we want to turn it over to the private sector and help facilitate it. I think an ongoing shared cost might be a model to look at. Second, out of the grantees, you mentioned that we got applicants from outside of the pool that we had been targeting. Can you, without going into specifics, but can you give us a sense of, are these folks that it's low and moderate income? And I think ideally we'd like to see low income people be able to move into a moderate income category rather than moderate income people move up above that. I mean, we wish them well as well, but I think the biggest objective is the former of those two options. So what are the backgrounds of the people who are getting these opportunities, and can you give us a flavor for that?
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Britt. They are primarily low income, and they live, with the exception of one who just was previously homeless and placed in a housing unit in San Jose, still qualifies under our program guidelines. That's to give you one example of the 6 applicants. The others do live throughout our Palo Alto Housing Corp development projects, and most of them are low income, not in the moderate income category. And we have to be very careful because the funding that we provide them is considered income. And so we have to be very careful on how we treat that and make sure that they're not kicked out of their housing because of the grant. So it's a balancing act with the funding and also with the individuals. We have one individual who's a single mother, and a few that have just had a difficult time in kind of going out of their comfort zone and really realizing their dreams.
So you're really seeing it's low income and very low income applicants.
Yes, we were really excited to see the variety of individuals. Those first 26 applications, the pre-applications that came in, it was a simple one-page, what's your business idea, what's your income, what drives you, kind of why do you want to be a business owner?
So that goes to the notion of the summary page and kind of the vision that we have for the program. We say low and moderate income. Should we be reconsidering whether it should be targeted for low and very low income? And that seems to be that we're getting a strong response from those, enough members of the community who qualify in that. And why don't we just define it that way?
Yeah, I think we certainly can. During this first pilot program, I think we were careful too because we just didn't know what the response was going to be. But I think now that we know that we had 26 applications and a lot of, if not most of them, were from the low income category, that perhaps we can more strictly define the eligibility for next year.
Great. And then finally, just following up on Councilmember Holman's question about the timing and the report, I appreciate that this year, you were kind of in a scramble because the timing didn't line up well and things. But just want to emphasize that when we as a finance committee or any of the standing committees make a recommendation to council that's unanimous, that'll ordinarily go on a consent calendar. And so the additional information you provide may or may not get read, but there certainly won't be public dialogue over it in one of the council committees. So it looks like you wanted to comment on
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that the city's adopted citizen participation plan requires 2 formal public hearings. So there is an opportunity to review the informational report and then provide comments during the CDBG item that's heard. It is a public hearing, and if after reading that report you find that there's something missing or would like to add, or perhaps at that time decide that it's not appropriate to continue with the program, there's definitely the opportunity to do so there.
Okay, so
Sorry about that.
helps somewhat. I would still say that it's the council committees who are tasked with going in with depth. So I'm okay with it this year, provided that we're setting up our timeline for next year so that the finance committee will have the opportunity to have the full information at that committee time. I just want to make sure that's how we go going forward. Thanks.
Just to clarify, the deadline's May 15th, so there's a short window, just so everybody's aware of that, between the May 5th public hearing and the federal deadline of May 15th.
Yeah, so next year, are we going to look at our timelines so that everything is maybe moved up by a month or two? Yeah. And I appreciate that. That's tougher, but it looks like to hit things properly, that's what we'd have to do.
Yes, and we're also hopeful that we'll have a little bit more structure to our program next year that will allow us to provide the City Council with an informational report well in advance of this item coming before the Finance Committee.
Thank you.
Clarification.
Of course.
The reference keeps being made to information report. I don't know why it wouldn't be possible to bring that as a part of, this item next year, as opposed to a separate information report. Couldn't it just come as a part of this item, and that way we've got it all at once, all together, and we can comment on the information report, which if it's an information report specifically, we can't.
Yes, ideally, I think that's what we will shoot for next year, is that we have an overview and wrap-up of the program that is attached to the CDBG funding report.
Great, thank you.
So without going into details, I'll third that. And that was one of the two comments I had. And then I just want to follow up on an answer to one of Karen's questions, or it came out at least during the discussion, which had to do with how much you guys have spent in this first year. So you kind of walk me through. You were given a $150,000 grant in the first year. You spent about $70,000, and then you're asking for another $150,000 this year. And I think Stephen, you might have mentioned something about it going to reserve, the remaining $80,000 from last year, or?
Sure, we're actually going to carry it forward into fiscal year 15. The way that our budget system works, and Lalo can help me out with this, we don't zero out the CDBG funds. It just gets carried forward on, and we're planning to use that towards the 6 applicants that we are giving funding to, and to supplement the 150 that we're asking for this program.
So, just so I'm understanding this properly, you're really asking for 70,000 more, or you're asking for so you're going to have 230 in?
That's correct. It'll be one. It's just a carryover.
Okay. Do you, and forgive me if it might have been in here, but I mean that's a big increase from it's a threefold increase from what you spent in your pilot year. Is that, I mean, do you guys have plans to actually spend that money, or that's a big chunk of change?
So one of the things that we found that you'll see in the informational report is that we should have placed a little bit more emphasis on the technical assistance portion. So for next year, what we're proposing is to introduce a 10-course series of technical assistance, Business 101, Business Plan 101, those types of lecture settings for another cohort to come together and get those classes. We were very strategic in how we used our technical assistance dollars this year, and we're fortunate enough not to spend as much money as we anticipated. We had a lot of volunteers come in and provide the services for free. For next year, we're thinking that the amount is not going to be enough, the $10,000 for technical assistance. We're hoping to partner with SCORE and maybe have some of those classes come here. And each one of those classes per individual is about $75 to $150. And we don't know what the size of the cohort will be. So what the council will also get in September is our annual report for fiscal year 14, and that will tell you exactly how much was actually spent during fiscal year 14.
Okay.
The other thing to consider is that the funds are committed for the grantees, but they may not be spent by the June 30th deadline.
Okay. So one last comment on that is, be careful about, if all of a sudden you kind of bake in that $230,000 budget, that would, then kind of assume that you have a way to get additional funding from outside sources, like Councilmember Burt talked about, or you guys come back to us and ask us for an extra $80,000 on top of the $150 on an annual basis, which we're probably not going to be able to accommodate. So keep that in mind in terms of what your plan is and how you guys think long term in terms of this spending. That was, I guess I had one more question in it while we've got, so just for everybody who's here, we had a minor mishap on the agenda where we put times on for the agenda items, and normally we say that those are suggested times, and we failed to add that line item on the agenda this time for tonight's meeting, which means that we can't actually legally start each item until after that time. So we won't be starting agenda item number 3 until 6:50, I believe. So I'm going to ask some questions that I might not normally ask.
We're ready for you, Councilmember Berman.
On packet page 11, This is during this funding cycle, the city did not receive any funding applications for housing or public facilities improvement projects. But then, Palo Alto Housing Corp. For example, is receiving funds for, I guess, services and not necessarily housing purposes. Is there something that we can do better next time to, market this to folks that could take advantage of that, given the, housing crisis that we have in terms of affordable housing in and around Palo Alto?
Sure. So we're actually working with our housing coordinator, Tim Wong, to coordinate his NOFA and the city's NOFA for our affordable housing CDBG dollars.
Okay.
And I think through that partnership, we'll have a lot more applicants come in, and also doing a little bit more outreach, maybe allowing more time for applications to come in, and just a lot more outreach on the kind of multifamily housing project that we fund out of CDBG.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
Just a follow-up question on the mentoring. So is the mentoring being set up so that it will continue to provide kind of one-on-one mentoring for each of these applicants as they go through the process?
That's the idea. That's kind of the role that they've played, at least in this pilot phase.
And so when will these businesses start getting kicked off, or have they?
Been meeting with them individually over the past 2 weeks, and we are hoping to have grant agreements executed for all 6 of them by May 1st, and each one of them has an implementation schedule that's tailored to their business. And they have, one of the requirements of the funding is that they spend a certain amount of money or any amount of money within a 3-month time frame, and then they have to report to staff for an entire year, and that includes mentoring and what have you.
So it occurs to me, and maybe this is already part of your thinking, but just as we have programs like we're going to have Ada's Cafe at the Mitchell Park Community Center, which I expect the community will really embrace the vision of that and support it because they think it's a great, wonderful idea. In a similar vein, we with right publicity, we might see the community, the customer base, be interested in supporting some of these businesses. So has there been any thought about how we may expose these efforts in a way to not only acknowledge a good program, but to give members of the community who want to say, yeah, I'd like to put my dollars in that. If I want a web design, I'm going to go to this person who's lifting themselves out of a lower opportunity into a greater opportunity, etc. Has there been thought about that? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. We currently have a map website. It's a link through our CDBG website, and our goal or intent is to have a link to each one of them, or maybe provide them with, we're asking them for a one-page bio with a picture, a little bit about their story, why they want to be business owners, and we'll upload that into our website. We haven't thought more beyond that. But if you have any suggestions, we're happy.
I think there's some, one at a broader level, out of the business mentors, look at which of those mentors are in marketing, and not only marketing assistance for the individual startup, but for the program as a whole, and see what kind of creative ideas can come out of that, of what sorts of resources can we use in the community that are not going to be necessarily out-of-pocket expenses, but like clever marketing gets great exposure. I mean, look at the Downtown Streets team. They're not spending a ton of money on marketing their program, and yet it's getting national exposure and replicated, and it's because people see something that they're inspired by and they want to help support it.
I think you've really touched upon a really neat aspect of the program, is that there are just a lot of people that want to get involved and to help in a program such as this. They've been almost waiting for the opportunity to get involved. I think some of our business members that have partnered with us have been thinking about a microenterprise program for a long time, but just didn't know how to start it and set it up, and we're very thankful that the city had come along to propose this pilot program. kind of speaking to your Ada's Cafe idea and kind of looking for exposure, we were extremely close in funding an applicant for a cafe at Cubberley as part of the arts, kind of arts activities that are there. An area where somebody could bring in prepared food and be a part of the arts organizations that are there as a way to provide further visibility, where in addition to the person operating the food service, they could have a rotating sense of artists that come in and get exposure that way as well. So there's almost limitless opportunities with this program. So we're really excited to see how far it can go.
Well, I think a subcommittee of the business mentors to have them think creatively about how to do this. But then when you brought up the Cubberley concept, it caused me to recall something that I've had a real strong interest in for a long while that hits a number of our community values, and that's to use some of our community facilities like parks to essentially reestablish some of the mom and pops stores that we've lost. And not necessarily a full-on retail store, but an example is at Rinconada Park, we had a little snack shack. Yeah. And for decades, and we lost it 15 years or so ago when the family retired. It's been taken over for storage by swim clubs, and I've talked with people in the neighborhood, and they would love to have that back, although not with as greasy of stuff. But a contemporary cafe that would really appeal to parents who drop their kids off at school, to all the people who already are at the recreational swimming and the organized swimming and all the park users, and not to mention appealing to right across the street at the folks visiting the library and the art center. So now to do that would require a capital investment. But this is one of the places where not only do we look for their proposals to come to us, but we may have some ideas of where the community would be well served by a micro enterprise that also could be started up by people who are trying to lift themselves up. So that's another thing that maybe we pose this. We have our Palo Alto program coming up. Pose these kinds of questions to the community, and we might see some really creative ideas come forward from the community. Thanks.
Good ideas. So, any other questions? We're going to move on to agenda item number 3. We need a motion, of course. Technicalities.
I'll do that if that's okay.
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
So you already have your direction to get a veggie dog stand established. So I'll move that the committee authorize allocation of CDBG funding as recommended in the draft 2015 action plan as described in the report, to 2, authorize city manager to execute the 2015 CDBG application and 2015 action plan for CDBG funds and any other necessary documents concerning the application, and to otherwise bind the city with respect to the applications and commitment of funds, and authorize the staff to submit the 2015 action plan to HUD by the May 15 deadline. And 4, so it doesn't get lost, is beginning with CDBG 2016 cycle, provide pertinent information describing the micro enterprise assistance program with the action plan staff report.
Second.
Would you like to speak to your motion?
I don't think so.
Would you like to speak to your second?
Well, I'll just say we've spent quite a bit of time on this micro enterprise, and it looks like it has some real potential for something that will help a lot of people and resonate within the community and resonate from sponsorship and resonate with people wanting to help support it through their being clients of these enterprises. So it's going to be interesting. Thanks.
So with that, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No. So that passes unanimously. But I guess we'll not necessarily go on consent because we've got this public hearings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect time.
Perfect timing.
Do you need wording for that fourth item?
Kim?
Kim, do you need wording for that fourth item? I wrote it pretty fast.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'll write it down. I'll write it down and hand it to you.
Okay, sure.
Great.
I can listen to the tape too.
Hi. So we're gonna move on to number
three.
three. So we're gonna move on to agenda item number 3, the Human Services Resource Allocation Process, HISRAP contract renewal for fiscal year 2015.
Thank you, and I'll be here for my half an hour in the spotlight. Good evening, council members. I am here to bring the fiscal year 15 Human Services Resource Allocation Process, also known as HISRAP, funding recommendation to you. I am Minka Vanderswag, and I'm with the Office of Human Services. As I just mentioned, I'm here tonight to bring and explain the fiscal year 15 HISRAP allocation to you, to give you some program highlights about what's been happening the last 6 months with HISRAP, and I know that we have several of our grantees here tonight that would like to speak to you as well. Give you an update on the current discussion on the relationship between our two biggest grantees, HISRAP, Avanitas and PAC, and their continued involvement in HISRAP. And finally, to give you an update on a supplemental human services needs assessment that the HRC is working on. As you may recall, during the fiscal year 14 budget hearing, Council approved the HISRAP program funding for fiscal year 14 and approved it in concept for fiscal year 15 at the same amount. The fiscal year 14 HISRAP allocation included a 7.1% increase, which was distributed in equal proportion to all the HISRAP grantees. This extra funding was very much appreciated, and the reason being, as a reminder, that there had been no increases to the HISRAP funding since 2003, and in that same time had been a 10% decrease. At present, there are two types of terms for HISRAP funding. So we have multi-year contracts. Those are 6-year contracts. Those are for the two largest grantees, PAC, which is Palo Alto Community Childcare, and Avanitas. And historically, agencies that have received 6-year contracts are those that have had a historical relationship with the city and have services that are called out in the city's comprehensive plan. There are also 2-year limited contracts, and those have traditionally been those that meet a critical services that is identified in the HRC's annual priority setting. So, and this type of funding gives, this biannual type of funding gives the HRC and the Finance Committee and the Council more of an opportunity to add new agencies to meet emerging needs. As mentioned in the staff report, Council recommended in last June's budget cycle that staff bring to the Policy and Services Committee the question of whether to remove PAC and Avanitas from the HISRAP process. This matter was discussed by the HRC at several meetings, and they brought a recommendation to the Policy and Services Committee on March 25th. That was discussed in great detail. The HRC brought forth a recommendation that stated they wanted to keep PAC and Avanitas in, with many caveats that ensured that money would not be taken from those two agencies to fund shortfalls to the HISRAP program, to the smaller agencies, or to make room to add new agencies. The Policy and Services Committee voted 2-1 against that approach. They were not in favor of that approach. They wanted staff to go forward to the full council with their recommendation of having PAC and Avanitas be out of the HISRAP process and be a direct services contractor with the city. And that will go to you for your consideration on May 12th. And since it wasn't a unanimous vote, it will be on the action agenda. As I mentioned, I wanted to give some program highlights for HISRAP, and again, we have some agencies here that may speak during public comment time. Some changes. I think this took place before last year, but I wanted to mention again that the Outlet program, which is an outreach program to LGBT youth, that program is now part of Adolescent Counseling Services. So they were joined, and they are now a program of that agency. Another interesting thing that just came to my attention today from an email that I thought was interesting and worth noting is Downtown Streets team. They sent out an email that the city has actually hired one of their workers. This was one of their team members that was actually out on the street and used to call in graffiti, and now is on the maintenance team to clean up graffiti, and is as an hourly. So I thought that was interesting to note. We also have all of our grantees have been meeting their performance indicators, and they're always very good stewards of the funding. I know 2 agencies are here tonight that I can't speak to every agency, so I apologize for that. But what I'm always impressed with, they're looking at the ways they do business and looking at new models that meet the needs of their client base. Envision Shelter Network, you may have seen an article in today's paper. They have implemented a new and innovative way of working with drop-in clients at the Opportunity Center. And Community Technology Alliance we currently fund a homeless voicemail program. And they're realizing technology has changed, and they're looking into new ways to provide technology and connection for homeless peoples in new ways as well. So I'm always impressed in the way that they try to be good stewards and also try to be innovative in meeting their program needs. The Human Services Commission, as you know, is the body that these recommendations go through, and they also want to know what our HISREP agencies are doing this year. They've made an effort to go out to as many of the HISREP agencies as they can to do site visits, to not so much as an inspection of services. That's something that staff takes responsibility for, but more to get a better understanding of the services that they provide. Last time we added 3 new agencies to HISREP funding, and I think that was a first in a long time. And one was a key service need that the HRC identified was tutoring for low-income children. So we added funding for Palo Housing Corp., which has its program called Stepping Stones, which is an after-school and summer program for low-income youth, and our HRC chair did a visit out to them. They also actually had a summer entrepreneurship program with business ideas, so that was very exciting as well. And Dream Catchers, which provides tutoring for low-income youth. Our other third new funding recipient is Vista Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired. I know that we have some representatives from that agency, and HRC commissioners, several of them went out to visit that agency as well. As some of you may recall, the HRC conducted a very detailed human services needs assessment in 2011, and that was a year-long effort conducted with no consultants and just the efforts of the HRC, some staff time, and an intern that we were able to get through the city's internship program. They wanted to do a supplement to that. They don't have the resources to completely do a new one, but they're currently working on a supplement to that needs assessment. They have contacted each of the agencies that receive HISREP funding, and to really ask them some interesting questions, such as, what part does HISREP funding play in your total agency budget? How has your agency handled the loss of CPI that it received until 2003 and the continued decreases since that time? What are current trends affecting your clients? And what would you do if more funding was available to address these needs? And if HISREP were to start receiving regular increases, would the agency be able to use the additional funding to use any of these trends? And the HRC is planning on compiling these results and presenting them to you at a future date. And part of that they will give any ideas for funding increases for HISRAP. They continue to feel that HISRAP is underfunding, and this supplemental needs assessment will help them very keenly, not just to say to you, because I don't think that's helpful to say, please give more money to HISRAP. I think that's just a pretty blanket statement that is not really quantifiable. They want to be able to go to you and say, this is what we're hearing from our grantees. These are specific gaps that we are seeing in this community. These are the struggles of some of our current agencies who are not able to meet the service needs, some of them very basic service needs in our community, and these will be the results if these service needs are not met. So they hope to finish that, and I'm hoping in mid to late summer we can get that type of information to you. So you had in your packet the budget sheet, which presents the HISRAP budget for next year. It's the same as it was for the current fiscal year. This is a normal process that we just bring the HISRAP budget to you for your consent to authorize the funding for a new year. And again, this would be providing second-year funding for the smaller 14 grantees and third-year funding for the larger grantees, PAC and Avenidas. And obviously, you know, on May 12th, council may come to the decision that they want those two grantees to be out of the HISRAP process. And at that point, staff would need to do an RFP for senior services and child care subsidy provision to seek providers for those two, because those contracts, the contracts that they currently have with us are through the auspices of HISRAP. Is very specific, the RFP that they responded to. So if that's the decision made, we will do new RFPs for that process. So the funding recommendation is a little over $1.2 million. So the recommendation that I'm bringing to you tonight is that you recommend to the full council that the 2013-15 Human Services Allocation Funding Period be included in the fiscal year 2015 Human Services contract budget within the Community Services Department, and that the city manager or his designee be authorized to execute year 2 of 2-year contracts and I think it would be year 4 of the 6-year contracts. So that is my staff report. I would be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you very much. And before I turn it over to colleagues for questions and comments, there are a couple of members of the public who have turned in speaker cards for this item. And if anybody else, please bring it on up and just hand it to Kim right here, and she'll take care of it. If anybody else wants to speak to the item, there are speaker cards on the table right over there. Just fill them out and hand them to Kim. So we'll get started with Joe. Is it Jaros? Jaros? Yes, yeah, so it's 3 minutes if you go to speak at the yellow mic. Thank you.
Hello again. I spoke to a few of you at the City Council meeting last year. My name is Joe Jaras. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and supervisor of social services at Vista Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired. We're an agency that's been in Palo Alto with various names, but many of the same staff, not all the same staff, for more than 70 years. And we serve people in a large area, but we were very excited last year for the first time to receive funding from the City of Palo Alto. And we agreed with that funding, which is $5,000, to serve a certain number of seniors in Palo Alto. And we have already, and we will have by June, served more than double that number of people. We have served more than 50 seniors in Palo Alto this last year, providing many different services to them. We provide many basic services. We start out with a social worker or a case manager going to the home, and we have individualized service plans for each client based on their needs so that they can retain their independence or regain their independence that they have lost because of vision problems. And when we go out, we set them up for services. Then the services that we provided under your funding were daily living skills services. The primary goal of daily living services is to allow people to manage at home safely and independently. The 4 basic things that are targeted are that people are able to get out of their houses in an emergency, that they're able to dial 911, that they're able to safely manage their medication as a person with vision impairment and blindness, and also that they're able to prepare a simple meal. We also provide a lot of other services beside that under the daily living skills category, including helping people to be able to do the things that matter to them the most and continue to do those things. We also have orientation and mobility services, and those are services that are also provided under this contract. That's when we help people to move around in the community as safely as possible, to learn to cross streets, to learn to use public transit, to learn to move around their own homes safely, and so that they do not injure themselves, and also have a better quality of life because they're not isolated at home. As a social worker, one of the things that we do is we have adjustment to disability counseling, we have support groups, and we have classes on adjusting to vision loss, as well as providing a huge amount of information or referral about services that are available in the community, and to connect people to those services like phones that they can use, like that where the buttons talk, and books that they can listen to, and many services, and also transportation options, so that we're trying to get people that are not safe driving out of their cars, and we provide them a lot of transit information, as well as helping them to apply for outreach and and provide them other transportation information. Is that it?
That's it.
Oh,
Sorry. And I'll try to give folks a heads up when they have a minute, since we don't have the little light system like we do in the full chambers. Next speaker is Don Wilcox.
Hi, I'm Dawn Wilcox. I'm a registered nurse, and thanks to Vista Center and all the things I've learned from them, I am enabled to, well, for one thing, I've kept my license up to its active level. Even though I'm not working to earn money, I'm a volunteer, and I'm the coordinator of the health library, which is one of our services. It's free to anyone in the visually impaired community, including caregivers. And over the years, Roger, who is a blind professor, and I are running this library, and it's very exciting for me to be able to continue using my nursing license, nursing knowledge, and I've expanded on it a great deal. When I started out back in the dark ages at UCSF, I never dreamed I'd be using email, and we developed an email research list with the help of Joe starting me off. And now I'm running a research list covering glaucoma, age-related macular degeneration, which is the disease du jour, and diabetes, which is a huge problem. And I'm sending out lists to 568 people, which is an awesome responsibility. I could not do that without the help of Vista. Over the years, I've been losing vision for 25 years, and I got to a point where I really needed a lot more help. So they sent me over our computer teacher, came to the house, and she's enabling me to shift from large print over to totally using my screen reader, because my vision is very unreliable, and you have to learn all these things. As a senior, I know this isn't very organized, you're talking about, I'm talking about demographics. We have more and more seniors, especially with macular degeneration, and we have a great need for these services, so I'm really glad that you're funding Vista for that. It didn't beep. It didn't beep. I'm so.
You've got 1 minute.
Thank you very much. So I guess that'll do it.
All right. Thank you, Don. So the next speaker is Philip Da.
Oh, I think my speech was supposed to address both issues.
Oh, okay. So you covered it in your. Okay, great. Thank you. And the next speaker is Georgia Basil. Did I get that? I'm not even close, am I?
Actually, it's Vasilopoulos, but they changed our name when we came through Ellis Island, so thank you. Thank you. I'm the directing attorney of Senior Adults Legal Assistance, SALA. We were founded in Palo Alto in 1973. We're a nonprofit law office. We provide free civil legal services to seniors throughout Santa Clara County, targeting clients that are very low income or at risk of abuse, isolation, or loss of independence. We provide our services here in Palo Alto through appointment days at Avenidas and Stevenson House, and by telephone for clients that have emergencies and really can't wait, 1 or 2 weeks for an appointment. This is the 15th year that we've received his RAP funding to expand our services here in Palo Alto, and we really do thank you. That funding has enabled us to double the number of appointments we have available here in Palo Alto. And this year, we've actually served 59 clients to date, and our annual goal is 60. So there really is a great need for our services here. With respect to current trends that we see, we continue to see seniors with legal problems related to the public benefits they rely upon for their basic needs: Social Security, SSI, Medicare, Medi-Cal, in-home supportive services, even CBAS. We continue to see seniors facing eviction or whose housing is in jeopardy, often because they need reasonable accommodations to live independently. Seniors that are victims of and financial abuse, usually by someone living in their home, an adult child, a grandchild, a caregiver, even people they rented out rooms to. And we continue to see seniors that need to do very basic planning for incapacity or end stages of life. And these are low-income seniors that can't afford to pay $500 an hour for an elder law attorney. This kind of planning helps them age in place, remain independent, and avoid conservatorships, which is really important. But it's also helpful to their caregivers because they can actually legally step in and manage their affairs when our clients can no longer do so. And we've discovered that it also helps with affordable housing issues because many low-income housing projects are actually asking their low-income senior tenants to have arrangements in place, such as a power of attorney, to enable them to step in should they become disabled or die while living there. Without SALA, most of our clients could not navigate the legal system or public benefit systems, represent themselves in court or public benefit appeals, and certainly not do any kind of legal documents such as powers of attorney or other things to prevent abuse or conservatorships. We are funded by the Older Americans Act. We cannot charge fees for our services. The only way we can support our program is through grants such as his RAP and our private fundraising. And by the way, our 13th annual golf tournament is at Stanford on September 15th. We hope you'll participate. Your funding helps us provide the highest level of service possible, and we really do appreciate that and hope we will continue to be funded. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And our next speaker is Karen Anselmo.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Karen Anselmo, and I'm the Director of Operations with Community Technology Alliance. So Community Technology Alliance brings technology solutions to issues of homelessness and poverty. We partner with hundreds of nonprofit organizations in the state, including a couple that are in the room tonight, Envision, Downtown Streets, and we think of ourselves as the technology backbone to those organizations. We bring database services and telecommunication services so that they can do their work more effectively on the ground. So thank you to the Finance Committee and the City of Palo Alto for your support. The HISRAP funds support 3 of our programs, and just given the limited time, I want to share an update on just one of those programs, which is our Community Voicemail program. So Community Voicemail, I think, is actually the first program that started at CTA 20 years ago. Through Community Voicemail, homeless clients get a stable, consistent phone number that they can use, which really is their lifeline to the world. They're able to get calls back if they apply for jobs, keep in touch with their caseworkers, keep in touch with family members. And so through that program, we've served hundreds, actually probably thousands of homeless clients over the years. That said, the world is changing. And through a survey that CTA conducted, we found that 62% of homeless clients in the survey actually have mobile phones. Probably everybody here has a mobile phone. And so, mobile technology is really becoming ubiquitous in the world. That said, in the United States, mobile technology is not designed for people who are homeless and for people who are extremely low income. The plans are expensive. There are a lot of rules and limitations to them. And so based on that, CTA is exploring a pilot program to design a mobile service specifically for homeless and low-income populations. We're partnering with Better World Wireless. Thank you. And our goal is to pilot a program that would provide cell phones and this specific service to 250 homeless clients. So we're exploring that program and shifting our focus from our traditional community voicemail to this program, which we think will better serve the needs of the population. And so I wanted to share that update and seek the city's support in that program.
Quick follow-up.
Sure.
So this new program that you have for mobile, you said it's with a nonprofit or a Better Community Wireless. So is it intended to be non-cellular but wireless, or is it both?
It's mobile phone technology. Is that what you're?
Well,
I might not actually know the difference.
Well, just whether off your phones, whether you can just go to use it through the wireless network and you're not paying the fees. As wireless becomes more ubiquitous.
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. I don't know exactly. I could look into that and get back to you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And our next speaker, and possibly our last, if anybody else wants to speak, their speaker card's on the table, is Eileen Richardson.
This is in a very awkward position. I'm going to move it. I can't believe everybody went through that. I'm Eileen Richardson. I'm with the Downtown Streets team and also Peninsula Healthcare Connection. Thank you for your kind comments earlier, and thank you for your support. Two things have happened with the Streets team. One is we just won an award, a national award actually, from MetLife for our work in partnership with the Palo Alto Police Department, the Palo Alto Business Improvement District, and which is also called Palo Alto Downtown. So there were 540 applicants, and we were one of 10 that were chosen nationwide, one of two in California. Also, yes, Connie is now working for the city of Palo Alto, so we're working with Jim to do a big article on somebody that was on our streets and now is a city employee in his dream job. And then also Peninsula Healthcare Connection merged with New Directions this past year. New Directions was founded by Melinda Mitchell, who's a former CEO of Stanford Hospital. And we have contracts with all the hospitals in the county pretty much. Stanford is a brand new contract, and with El Camino, et cetera, to take the men and women out of the emergency rooms that are homeless and try to get them housing, give them case management so that they don't end up back in the emergency rooms. So that's sort of our update for the year, and thank you again for all your support.
Thank you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to colleagues for any questions and comments they have. Anybody? Councilmember Holman?
So thank you for bringing this forward for the presentation, and for all of you for coming and speaking, and for the really, truly wonderful community work you do. And Eileen, I can hardly wait to see what you're going to do next. I have I guess I have 5 questions here, and some of them are pretty short. The issue of Avenidas and Palo Alto Community Child Care and those being broken off, we don't have minutes from either the HRC or from Policy and Services. So why, in brief, why did HRC say keep them as a part of the HISRAP program? Why did 2 of the 3 Policy and Services council members say, no, break it off?
Well, can I quickly ask a question? I don't think that's not on tonight's agenda, right? That's going to be coming to full council?
No, that will be coming to full council. I just gave it because it was pertinent to, as an aside to tonight's conversation. But tonight I'm asking that you approve it as if they would stay in.
And then we can, so tonight we're just talking about amounts, and we can talk about, and then
Correct.
This is an item that will be coming to full council.
May
so
12th.
I'm not even sure if it's appropriate necessarily for us to get into a policy discussion on that tonight.
I will leave that to you to decide.
Good and appropriate point, Chair. So thank you for that. And so Lalo, a question for you is, what is the anticipated annual budget for 2015?
We are still trying to finalize it as of today, so I don't have a final number for you, I'm afraid.
I'm not even looking for a final. I'm just, what is it looking like?
It could be in the 170 range.
Okay.
A million, obviously.
Yes, yes. $170, we'll write a check. 170 million. So I look at, because one of the rules of thumb that some communities use is, is the city committing at least, 1% of its budget to HISRAP funding. And we still fall, let's just suppose it's 170 million. We still fall considerably short of that. Which to me is a concern and an issue, and I'd like to see us get to that 1%. There are so many demands for money in a community, well, any community, but certainly in this community, including our nonprofits. But I really would like to see us work towards getting to 1%. So there's that as a comment. I think Pat's going to speak to one group, and then how did you say, Minka, that we could suggest additional nonprofits? How could we do that tonight, or how do we introduce a new organization?
That would be at the beginning of the next cycle. So next fall we will be putting together an RFP for the next cycle. So that would be for consideration fiscal year 16. So most of these grantees are in their second year of a 2-year cycle, and in my tenure, I have not seen a group that has been added in the second year. There have been times when a group has gone to finance or council to speak about a certain need or to request an additional allocation, but I have not seen that a group has been added in the second year. That's usually reserved for when the funding cycle opens up again.
So one of the things that, because I was just 1 year, but I was liaison to the HRC, and we had some years there where things were pretty lean, times were lean, and there were some organizations that were cut from the program for one reason or another. It seemed to me, maybe I'm misremembering, but I think there have been some organizations that have been dropped.
I don't believe that there are organizations. There were some organizations that did not receive funding and then became part of the HISRAP funding again, but there's mostly agencies that request funding, and we have more requests than we have actual funding. So then there's a real decision-making process whether with static funding, how we should compact the budget for other agencies to add new groups in, and that's what we did last time. And then we were able to be a little more generous to everyone with the 7.1% increase. But I don't remember agencies that were receiving funding, and then when the funding cycle opened up, unless a deadline was missed, that we didn't continue with them. But I've only been through 2 HISRAP cycles, so that could have happened before my tenure.
And I could be wrong, but my memory says that there have been organizations that are dropped. And so I'd just like to put in your thoughts an organization I'd really like to be considered next year. And I won't go on and on about it, but I'll just say what the organization is and why I think it would be appropriate. And so I don't know if they are aware of the funding cycle, but
we give names of agencies to the purchasing department, so prospective bidders, so we give them a bidders list when the RFP opens up.
Okay, so I would like to add FLY, and sounds like.
Can we do this tonight? I need to ask.
I won't take more than a couple minutes here.
It's a suggestion for the RFP, and if we leave it at that, I think we're good.
Okay, so maybe be fairly brief.
Yeah, I will be very brief. It's FLY, Fresh Lifetimes for Youth. It's a fairly new nonprofit that works to break the crime, violence, and incarceration of teens. Anyway, it's award-winning, and I think it's pertinent to activities that happen in this community and adjoining communities that they work in San Mateo and Santa Clara County.
Yeah, I'm familiar with them.
Yeah, so I would really like to suggest that we reach out to them next year during this process. I think those are probably my only questions. The point that I have is the one about how we get to, 1% of our annual budget, though, because I think we're woefully lagging in that regard.
The HRC would agree with you.
I know they would. I know they would, and I'm sure there are other people on the other side of this table that would also agree with that. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Burt.
Well, maybe I'll start with a follow-up to the overall funding question. Mika, you mentioned that since '03, we've had no inflationary increase.
Correct.
We actually had a cut of
That's
10%.
correct. There was a council policy to give a CPI increase for his rep grantees, and that was temporarily suspended in 2003, which became really a permanent suspension. And then in 2007 and 2009, there was 5% cut both those years.
And do you recall how a temporary one? I don't know why in '03 there was a temporary suspension. It was not a recessionary period, and then how that became permanent.
I believe it was. I might leave that to Lalo, but I know when, the staff is directed to bring forth its budget for their departments, that they are directed to, cut a certain percentage, and that department decides how that department will, what cuts to present to the internally first to the finance department for consideration, and then further on to council. Lalo's been around for a little bit longer than I have, so I will ask him to answer.
I don't have the complete history, even though I am a dinosaur. But my recollection is that we had the impact of CalPERS going from fully funded to not being fully funded in the early 2000s, and I think that's the correlation.
So it was a lag period from the internet bubble burst.
Correct.
I recall that. So that local government had a lag period when it hit them, and then as the economy recovered, that became permanent somehow, which I'm not sure what policy mechanism brought that about. So under 2003, I don't know whether you'd remember this, Lalo, but Councilmember Holman had asked, what's our anticipated revenue for this coming year, and it's about $170 million. Do you know what it was in '03?
I could look it up. Actually, that'd be the better way. I'm not sure pretty fast, but I can certainly look it up and be able to tell you. We loaded all our budgets online now, so I should be able to find it. So if you want to keep going, then I'll get to it.
And then what really would be of interest is whether we think of it as a goal of a 1%, or if we think of it as our 2003 baseline with inflation, just to be at the same portion of our community's resources devoted toward these needs as we were historically. About what number would that be? And so while you're looking at that, Minka had also talked about the process by which HRC is looking at how additional identifying needs and how those funds might be wisely spent. And I'll just say that, last year when we were looking at our FY 2014 budget was the first time since the recession that we went into a year anticipating that we would have surplus funds. The surplus was even greater than we thought. On top of that, fiscal year 2013, which when we were in June of 2012 struggling with that budget, we still thought we were looking at a deficit for 2013, fiscal 2013, and we had a surplus from that year. Now we've been looking at important capital investment needs in infrastructure, but we basically have had a couple of years in a row of surpluses, and we anticipate that going forward at least for the next several years. So as we come into as we come into our Finance Committee discussions, I'm concerned that the input from HRC will lag the timing of the Finance Committee for additional budgeting for fiscal year 2015, if that's what we want to allocate. So any thoughts on how we may align those processes? I mean, we could conceivably put a placeholder dollar amount without having identified where those dollars would best be spent. That would be one mechanism that I can think of.
Would you like me to respond? Thank you. So, a couple of thoughts. One is, as you suggested. Another one is to put this in what we typically recommend to you, that you use a parking lot during the budget process. And so the parking lot idea is that this is a point that needs further discussion. You want to understand where the proposed budget is, what the impacts of the proposed budget are before you finalize any decision. So then you would carry that discussion, and you could either have more discussion during the community services department night, or wait until what we call the wrap-up, when you by then know everything that has been proposed, any changes that you may have made to the proposal that the city manager puts forward, and then you make final determination.
But would even that additional month align with the HRC timeline?
I know they've had, if they knew that there was an option of getting money for next year, I think that would
Hold some extra meetings?
that would put a fire underneath them to finish this supplemental report. They have talked to all of the agencies. There's a couple that they want to have some additional conversations with, and those are actually scheduled in the next couple weeks. So if there is some chance of additional funding and you'd like to see some very specific recommendations, I believe I'd have to work with Lalo or work with the council on when that would need to be done, and I would check with the HRC and I'm sure that they would do their best to make sure that happened.
I recall that last year, when the Finance Committee talked about the additional percentage, if I'm recalling correctly, correct me if I'm not, the HRC was given a task to go and figure that out before the final adoption of the budget. So that I know it's not the ideal timing, but that was what the process was last year.
Well, based on our agenda item tonight, we certainly couldn't give an explicit allocation of any sort, but we could give a request to HRC to evaluate and come back as early in the budget process as possible with recommendations.
Just to remind the committee, you have $250,000 each year that is the council contingency that you could use for whatever purpose you see in terms of the proposed budget. What you have done, not you but you, the Finance Committee, in the past has done, you have done one-time funding as well from that pot, because you want to think about that pot as a one-time funding source.
And that's a good point, and we've done some of that. I think last year there was discussion about how do we begin a process of institutionalizing the funding for this in a way that brings us back to what our former level was. And so I favored in some of those previous years, because where we really didn't have the ability to anticipate strong budgets for the city going forward, I think that's changed enough that we really are ready to make a next step. So Lalo, you found up
I found the 2003 and 4 fiscal year number, so it's close enough. 114,950,000, so roughly $115 million.
So we were actually at that time over 1%, it looks like.
I will leave that to him.
Okay. So while Lalo's looking, I think that'll be great if you have a better number, but it puts us in the ballpark. I mean, we have a sense of where we were. The other thing that I'd like us to be thinking about is that this is an area that has the greatest need during a downturn. And so if we have cuts to these programs and downturns, it's really counter to the need level. Of course, everything suffers in a downturn. You know, it's less income and greater needs often. But one of the things that we may want to look at is whether we set up some sort of a buffer or reserve that assures that in a downturn, these areas are not cut. And so if we're in a strong period right now, we could look at, for instance, right now, if we're saying, well, HRC is not going to necessarily be able to come with well-considered additional spending that might be as much as we might be willing to consider this year. Well, maybe the council would consider half of those additional dollars going into expansions of programs for fiscal year 2015 and half into a reserve fund. Just a concept for us to think about. Two more questions. One is, I've heard that the food closet may be in some jeopardy on its funding, and I don't recall out of what organization it's funded and how that works and its relationship to HISRA.
That's Envision Shelter Network, and if Philip is still here, would you mind that he answered?
Okay.
Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Councilmember Burt. Yes, the food closet has been in Palo Alto for over 24 years, I mean, longer than I can recollect. And it's the food pantry that serves 2 bags of groceries twice a week to the homeless population in Palo Alto and also low-income folks, not just homeless. A lot of our homeless folks who move into permanent supportive housing also rely on these services because their incomes are still very little. So people who are housed at the Opportunity Center, Armor Place, and a lot of all these places use that food closet as a source of living. I mean, unfortunately, our HISRAP allocation is a little above $12,000, and the budget for that food closet is $41,300. The food closet is the one that's located at All Saints Church. And if you look at it, you might think that it's a collaboration with the church, but we actually pay $1,300 as rent to the church. And that doesn't include the food that we have to buy, the manpower, and all the other stuff that we have to do. So it's costing us quite a bit to be able to provide that essential services to all the folks who use that service in Palo Alto.
All right, well, I'll leave that to, if we have the HRC do an accelerated dive into these issues, then maybe that can be one of the areas that they take a hard look at.
I looked at the HISRAP budget. The adopted budget in 04-05 was $1,318,853, and it's almost the 14-15 budget almost exactly matches the adopted budget of 05-06, which was $1,214,910.
Thank you. Finally, as we look at these services, I think it's important for us to look at how they integrate with other elements of city programs and the ability of the recipients to be able to access the services. And one thing that came to my mind is that we have coming before us a proposal for an expansion in the shuttle program. Is the that shuttle expansion, is the discussion around that including needs of the clients that your department serves in the consideration of the routes?
Those routes were set without, we were not involved in the setting of those new routes. When I saw the CMR come out for that issue, I had a discussion with Jaime Rodriguez about that, and He said the routes had been set already, and they had been in consultation with public input at some community meetings, but not specifically. I know that the HRC, when they did their first Human Services Needs Assessment, had discussions with the Planning and Transportation Committee about concerns that transportation was one of the baseline needs that had key gaps in Palo Alto. So while the new routes go by many of the senior centers, and I know Jaime and I had a direct discussion that was a key consideration that they made. Unfortunately, there wasn't a specific conversation with the HRC and Transportation Division on that.
Well, then I'll say that when that came before the council, I raised a question about whether these routes were set or tentative or hypothetical. And the response that I received was that they were conceptual, and that they were not set. And I just saw that we received today information from our Director of Planning and Urban Environment, and the caption under that route sheet was proposed, which is a stronger characterization than we were told at the council meeting, and one that concerns me, because I'm not sure that those routes are necessarily going to meet a variety of issues, including that there's duplication on El Camino that's extremely well served with the VTA buses, and other areas like Alma that we have no service. So I don't know what are the right set of new routes. I would be interested in hearing my colleagues' thoughts on whether we should specifically request or convey through this meeting that we would like the Transportation Department to be conferring with community services and the clients that they meet necessarily as a consideration in the selection or recommendation of new routes. So I'll be interested in that aspect as well. And I think that covers my questions and comments.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Niss.
I'm just going to add a couple of things because I'm struggling with something tonight. What I'm not hearing, and perhaps it's because I haven't sat on this committee before, but I'm not hearing what the interaction is with the other funding sources, with the county, with the state, and so forth. And so in here, I can see what their budget is, and I can see what they've asked for, but I'm not sure what the rationale was for the ask. Can you give me that background, or is that all going to be in the notes from the HRC and from policy?
The rationale for the original asks?
For the original ask, right.
Right. Those were in the CMR for when we did their original ask. So they proposed a very specific scope of services. They gave specific information about what percentage of the funding request as far as their full agency or program
Which
budget.
is in here tonight.
Right.
Yeah,
But
no,
they
I can
also
see all that.
Right, but they also indicate to us what percentage of funding they receive from government, in-kind, donations, and so forth. So when the HRC looks into making funding recommendations, whether to fund an agency or not, that is part of the process, because we don't want city funding to be a major funding source for that agency. So that is part of the original discussion. I think the high-level sheets of the applications were included last year. Does that answer your question, or am I missing something?
But I think we can go into it another time, particularly at the full council. If we're talking about a 1% donation, a 1% coming from the city for his wrap, which is more often seen as a county or a state funding source, I'm just curious as to how that was derived and how we got to that.
That's not that's something that was more in concept.
So it's more subjective than objective, correct?
At this point, yes. The HRC did look at other cities to see that do support of human services agencies, and there are agencies that do give a certain percentage of the overall city budget to agencies. And I think they looked at that when we did the Human Services Needs Assessment. They realized other cities were doing that, and they saw that as a model of what they could potentially ask the city to commit.
Mm-hmm. We can go into it another time because it's hard for me to talk tonight, but
Sure.
really we're talking about comps. And I'm talking about how the original analysis was done for this. For example, many of the groups in here are also funded by the county as well. And so as you look at what the total amount will be and what we feel is our obligation as a city, I think, as I said, either that's subjective or there is some objective way to look at this that isn't clear to me as yet.
Councilmember, Vice Mayor Ness, you bring us some good points, and we've looked at it in the past, and I haven't looked at it recently, so I don't want to contradict anything the HRC has done. But some of the points of topic that we discussed before that we can table for future discussion, but just it's good to know. It's the difference in the budget size of Palo Alto versus some of these other agencies, and some of that is because of the uniqueness of Palo Alto, that there's a lot of administrative support for the non-typical business activities that we provide, such as our own utilities, and that we provide services for other agencies as well. So it adds up. There's a lot of discussion that if you look at our per capita spending comparison to Mountain View, for example, that we look way out of whack. Well, that's one of the major drivers. So that was the topic of discussion before. Will this 1% really represent the right number given all of those differences? And my recollection, and this probably goes back about 10 years ago, that I think Beverly Hills and Palo Alto were about two agencies that had a bigger amount than your typical city providing for these type of services.
Good, thanks. And I'm hoping that when these reports come to us that we can see clearly why certain amounts were selected or not selected by the HRC in particular.
Okay, I can include that. That was probably included in last year's, so I can include it in when it goes to full council. Is that what you're seeking, or just the next funding cycle?
No, it's some background for this funding cycle. As you said, we don't have the reports in here.
No, this is typically just more of a. In the past, this has typically more been an informational report. Thank you for your support in the past. Please approve the funding for next year. These are some updates. So that's been the form that this update has happened in the past. And if council would like to see a different form in the future, we can definitely work on that.
Thank you. And maybe one thing, an easy way to accomplish that goal in the future is just include last year's report, which I think had a lot of that, data because it was kicking off the 2-year cycle. Yeah, just as an attachment. I wanted to second Councilmember Burt's idea of a kind of his wrap rainy day fund, as I'll call it, or a reserve fund. I think is a good idea. Because as we know in the California economy, every 9 or 10 years, we get a downturn, and rather than have to, I view these things differently than I would have 2 weeks ago. I joined a nonprofit 2 weeks ago, and I'm slowly getting, or quickly getting, an appreciation for how much every dollar counts. But when we do get downturns and the city budget drops, we have to cut funding in everywhere. And so if we have a reserve fund, I think that's a great insurance policy for that inevitability. One question I had was, you talked about HRC's working on a supplement, and you mentioned that they didn't have the resources that they had last time when they were doing their initial analysis in 2010?
That's correct. In 2010, we had the services of an intern, and that person did a lot of the demographic work, looking in the census tract, the California cities demographic information, and so forth. But it took 2 commissioners. It was the better part of a year doing a lot of this work. But a lot of the research work, looking into what other communities had done, was done through the work of a full-time intern on a 3 to 4 month period.
And are we kind of past the point of, are they still at a point where some small amount of funding would be helpful, or are they kind of past that point at this stage for the supplement, for purposes of completing the supplement?
I think, that at this point, because they weren't anticipating any type of funding, I think they just did this more personable, one-to-one contact with agency update and looking into doing a full update in the next couple of years or so. I mean, it was a lot of work. So I think even with most of the other cities that did human services needs assessment, because we looked at a lot of them, all did private companies that do this type of human services needs assessment on a professional basis, which is thousands of dollars. So ours was pretty low key. So I could go back to the HRC because that in turn was, supervised by them to see what their capacity is into looking at it in more depth. But at this point, that's what they felt like they could handle.
Okay, and I mean, if they already feel like they've done a sufficient job, I wouldn't want them to go recreate the wheel. What I would suggest in the future, and this is just 1 out of 9 council members talking, is if there's times when our commissions feel like they need a small amount of money, not $20,000 or $25,000, but a couple $1,000s for professional help for something they're working on, I'd encourage them to approach the council, and maybe that's something we'd use our council fund for. I don't know if there's, I'm kind of going out on a limb here. I don't know if there's any precedent for that, but if it's something that's a good expenditure, and we all know and respect, and many of us have been on these commissions and know the amount of volunteer time they put in as is. So I think we'd be willing to support them.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Do you have a request?
So no, not on that. But next time they should consider it. Councilmember Burt, you brought up the idea of the shuttle routes, and I'm just trying to figure out. I absolutely think that the transportation department should have a more comprehensive discussion with our different departments about to get their input. I don't know how that fits into tonight's agenda per se. I don't know if you have any suggestions or thoughts on that.
Well, if we gave guidance, it would be just as that. It would be a request that the Transportation Department engage fully with community services on those needs. That's directional, and it's not prescriptive,
Yeah.
and it ties in with, I think, the broad concept of how do we fulfill the aspirations that we have within his REP guidelines.
Yeah.
May I offer also that you'll definitely get an opportunity, and not knowing the timing, so forgive me on that. In May, when you have the budget hearing for the planning and the actual shuttle, you could be more direct in your direction.
My concern is that when we wait until that time, things are cooked already.
Yeah, and I think we hear you, and we can do, as staff, we can do that. We don't need your direction.
That's what I really would like to see, is take this time before it comes to the council to do that reconsideration, rather than what we often will hear is, great idea, but it's too far along the line to reconsider, so you're stuck with what we proposed.
Yes, and I didn't mean to imply we weren't going to do it ourselves. I was just thinking if you wanted to take formal action.
Yeah. So we'll, and I'm assuming we will if we don't see that there's been more collaboration between the departments at that time. That's kind of all the comments and questions I had. A lot of my colleagues covered most of it, so I'll go ahead and make the motion that the Finance Committee recommend that the City Council take the following actions: allocate CDBG funding as recommended in the draft 2015 action plan and as described in this report. I have no idea where I am. Sorry, guys. Staff recommends that the Finance Committee recommend to the Council that the funding allocation as recommended by the Council for the 2013-2015 Human Services Resource Allocation Funding Period, Attachment A, be included in the fiscal year 2015 Human Services contract budget. The city manager or his designee be authorized to execute year 2 of separate 2-year contracts with 14 agencies. This was approved in June 2013. And the city manager or his designee be authorized to execute year 5 of separate 6-year contracts with Avenidas and Palo Alto Community Child Care. And do we want to provide that guidance element, or do we feel like that's been accomplished through our conversation?
Well, I think at a minimum, we should make the request that HRC evaluate supplemental or increases in funding for fiscal year 2015,
and bring
to the Finance Committee. Yes,
So then are we putting this in a,
that can be in the motion.
so which is the better way to do this? To do it the way it's going forward at the moment, or to, as you had suggested previously, Lalo, put this item into a parking lot so that we can reconsider it when...
It's not one or the other.
So this will come to the Finance Committee, and then at Finance Committee, we can say we want to put it in the parking lot, have a better understanding of the entire budget situation.
Can I offer an
Well,
explanation on the parking lot? What that parking lot would be is if the HRC had not had ample opportunity to complete this process at the commencement of our budget process.
Like May 9th or whatever.
Yeah. Then the parking lot would be, give them 3-4 weeks to complete it by the time that finance or that budget process would end. So that's the parking lot. But what we really want tonight is to get the ball rolling now, so that it doesn't go in the parking lot unless it has to, or if it goes in the parking lot, it's far enough along that by the end of the budget process, they've actually got the recommendations.
I appreciate that, because not having been on finance before, I wasn't clear on that that process in the best. So I appreciate that clarification. So, I don't know if Pat seconded your motion in or not.
I'll add his bit to the end of mine, and then if anybody wants to go ahead and second it.
So I'll second it.
Perfect. Kim, do you feel like you caught?
Yes.
Great. So I have nothing to say to the motion.
I have some questions when you're here.
And as the seconder, I don't have anything to say either. Go ahead.
I'm not quite sure where we're going with this. Are we indicating that there could be more money out there, and that we, as of tonight, are allocating more money go into this? What is the intent?
So the intent is to approve what was, because we're kind of in the mid-year of the cycle, we're asking the city manager to approve what was in the initial contract, so the initial amounts from last year, and then we're asking the Human Relations Commission to look into, in line with their supplement of their needs assessment, whether or not they, would propose increased funding for particular reasons for this year. And we're asking them to come back to us with a report either before we start the budget cycle or during that process with a recommendation to possibly increase funding. So we're not we're not specifically advocating for an increase here, but we are kind of indicating that we're open to that idea if HRC has a logical recommendation.
So we're saying that we're opening up the process sort of in the middle of the year in April, and we're going to begin in May to do our finance, because we're now April 15th. So I'm not quite, so let me just walk you through this. So we're now saying to HRC, there might be some more money there. There could be another, how much? Are we talking another 200,000 or 300,000?
We're not setting any number as far as I can tell.
Then what are we saying?
I mean,
are we saying are there any more are we saying, do you need any more money in general? Then come to us at HRC and let us know what that would be. I really just want to know what the process is, because I'm not hearing it clearly.
Sure. I don't know if staff wants to take a crack, or I can.
I would say we're not completely opening it up, that we would say, hey, other nonprofits in the community, would you like a part of this extra money? What we're saying is, through the supplemental needs assessment, we've had specific conversations with our current grantees to talk about new and emerging needs or urgent budget shortfalls that they are experiencing. And we would present those needs to the Finance Committee, and you would be able to make a determination if you wanted to allocate additional funding either on a one-time basis or an ongoing basis to address these needs.
And I'll
Or-
add to that if this will be helpful. If you look at our on packet page 77, we, for instance, see the difference between what was the request at the beginning of this 2-year cycle and what was actually allocated. So,
And that's exactly my point, Pat. Because it's, for some reason, a certain amount was allocated. Are we saying that we had this amount and that was the amount that could be parceled out, but now we think there's more money, and therefore we can go back and do a reassessment as a finance committee? Is that what we're saying?
that's correct.
And how would we assess that then as the finance committee?
How would we assess what?
How would we decide? Let's take
Decide,
abilities.
let me ask a clarifying question. How would we decide how many dollars we would allocate, or how would we decide how those dollars would be spent?
Either way. So let's
Okay.
look at Abilities United, which asked for 53, it looks like to me, and has been allocated 40.
Well,
And
it's an easy answer, a pretty easy answer. It's the same process by which we do all of this. The HRC comes with their recommendations.
So
And then
that-
only if we see some abnormal or unusual reason that we might want to deviate from the recommendation of the HRC as to which program they've decided has the greatest need, would we then take an action. But we don't normally, as a finance committee, go through each of these and make our own calls.
So that's my exact,
That's what I'm trying to
Councilmember,
answer.
that's exactly where I'm headed. So what do you use for criteria then for making the decision?
The recommendations of the HRC.
But we have the recommendations of the HRC.
Yes, but we fell short on funding them.
Then-
So they'll
then-
come back, but those were recommendations a year plus ago. And what they'll be doing is going back and looking as best they can in advance of the Finance Committee meeting on what they would say are specific. They'll look in a granular way at these specific programs and understanding.
I presume they've done this before.
They've gone through the exercise, but they'll be updating it. They may come back, I don't know what they'll do, they may come back and say, it's just what we proposed before. Seeing their work, they take it very seriously, and I suspect they'll dive into this and really update it and have specific recommendations.
I hear that very clearly. I need to know what the amount of money is that they're dealing with. What are we saying to the HRC? We have this amount of money in addition. Is that what we're indicating tonight? Because I think we're doing this somewhat on the fly.
So is your suggestion that, I mean, just so I'm understanding, is it that we try to provide some sort of a cap to,
I think we need to know
that we don't have it be too
what
open-ended?
amount we're actually dealing with. Otherwise, we're saying unless I'm hearing this wrong, I'm hearing you're saying to the HRC, were there some groups here that you felt should have had more funding, but the amount wasn't allocated? And if so, would you bring those to us and justify those numbers? I'd be somewhat concerned we would have a room full of people who are all were the applicants saying, we really do need this amount. That's what I would be doing if I headed up one of those agencies. I would say, as Abilities United, I would say absolutely we need that extra $13,000. I just want us to have a parameter on it rather than leaving this wide open and saying, what was it exactly we said to the HRC? Because this is just a month from starting on the actual budget for the city.
Prior finance committees have typically given some parameters, either as a percentage or an amount. So you may want to consider.
And I think that's a good idea. So we've got a motion, we've got a second. Would you like to offer an amendment of some parameters?
I would have to look to Lalo to do that. I don't.
I can offer it.
We don't quite know what amount it is at this point.
Well, we know that we have a very large budget surplus. We know that we don't necessarily want to spend it all.
So then, if each one of these, let me try this one. If each one of these can justify it, then would you bring them up to the level that they asked for?
That wouldn't be my strategy, but I'll.
So what would be the strategy?
Sure. So
I just want to know how we. I want to know how we get to
Right,
this
we
number.
know, and I'm saying I'll try and answer your question.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I would offer to amend on the motion is that that the HRC review the funded agencies in the HISREP with to identify most critical needs that were not that were requested and unable to be allocated for FY 2015, not to exceed the amount initially requested by those agencies. And I'll speak to that to explain what I mean, just to help clarify. That's not saying that we want them to necessarily come with that full 548. And but it is placing that as the high-end parameter of it, and we're asking them to review on a program-by-program basis what they think are the most critical unmet needs.
So my clarification question would be, because obviously you've all noticed that they all didn't get what they asked for last time. So looking at what they originally asked for and the scope of services of what they originally asked for might be a little bit different than some new and emerging needs that they have conveyed to the HRC during the supplemental needs assessment. So as you've stated it, it seemed to me it would only include the prior as a consideration. So I just want some clarification on what your direction is.
Your point sounds good. And that, I was trying to respond to Council Member Niss's request, but I think as you had explained earlier in your report, that they are in the process of looking at both new and emerging needs and as well as needs they had previously identified that weren't able to be funded.
Correct.
So I guess I would frame it as to include both. Any critical new and emerging needs that HRC has identified, as well as critical needs that were identified previously but unable to be allocated in the previous budget cycle, not to exceed the the additional $300,000, the additional $200,000 that was requested in aggregate that was not funded at the beginning of the prior 2-year cycle.
So we're indicating then we're willing to go up to the 200,000.
Correct.
Well, that makes
we're willing to consider it, not going.
That makes it very easy. I can support that. If we're willing to talk about going up to an amount.
Is that a second?
Yeah, that is a second.
Okay.
Because otherwise, I'm very uncomfortable dealing with this kind of floaty method out there of determination.
But we're not. Okay.
Sure.
And if they are able to determine that everyone is justified, however, I think that this is tricky. What we're looking at.
For formality's sake, can I quickly? So you second. Can I quickly ask? Do you have any other comments to your motion?
No, but I thought we were modifying the original motion, but whatever.
Or to your amendment, I guess. No. Sorry. Now, I'm just trying to.
As long as we've got a number there, as long as we know what number we're working with, I'm okay with it.
Chair Berman, just so I'm clear and I give you proper advice, I heard the word consider. And so I think that's an important word that needs to be part of this motion, because you have yet to see the proposed budget. So all the numbers you've seen in the long-range financial forecast are going to change.
Yeah.
And so I just want to, give you that advice so you don't tell me later, why didn't you tell us before?
Yeah. No, I think that's good. A good point.
And the other question I have is just, and this can be answered when this is considered at an upcoming meeting, is how would that affect Pac and Avenidas if they are
My next question.
if they are out of the HISREP process? They will be a direct service provider or direct contractor with the Human Services Office for Community Services. So we other direct services contractors who would not, are not part of HISREP. So, and they usually, their budget just goes up if I work with them on their scope of services and I recommend an increase. So if I would need direction from you when that time comes, if Pac and Avenidas would be included in any proposed, supposed increases.
And is my understanding correct that that's going to be coming to full council, did I hear May 12th? So that'll be, will that be before we discuss this item in the budget process? I don't remember exactly how we've broken that out.
May 20th is,
so there we go.
May 20th is CSD's night.
So
and
hopefully
then the
we'll have-
wrap-up is right now May 29th, so,
Yep.
so there's some windows.
May 20th would be our first opportunity to come back.
And we'll have clarification on the Pac and Avenidas element by that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
May I offer one other piece of input on this?
Yep.
Because as I got thinking about this, what the process that we've committed to considering this in the budget cycle, we may want to ask HRC to perhaps place these additional fundings in two categories, the highest and the second highest priorities.
In terms of priorities.
Yep. So that there's some way in which.
Right, they often give multiple options for the Finance Committee and the Council to decide.
Great, so if that
That's
is their
something you're
normal
seeking.
process, that would be welcome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Councilmember Holman.
Yes, just one clarification that might be helpful. So I've heard that HRC is to identify any emerging needs that we weren't able to fund in the prior cycle, up to, the amounts that were requested previously. What I'm not clear about is, let's just say, we've heard envisions and identified concerns from this group even, that the downtown food closet is in trouble. So does this mean that, let's just say, and I'm just making this up, so don't anybody get alarmed, but let's just say, Dreamcatchers asked for $55,000, there was $8,000 granted. So does that mean we could shift some of the $55,000 to Envision to fund?
Yes.
So are the
And
numbers?
I may have been not adequately clear in the motion, is that the additional amount is the aggregate.
So we've
amount.
taken away the element of the requested.
We're
by individual
allowing
agencies.
HRC to use their discretion in the recommendations on how that
How the
total
dollars are
dollars
applied.
may be applied.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And you'll capture that, Kim? Thank you so much.
That was going to be my question also, to make sure that we got that straight. Perfect. And so I'm going to support the motion and the amendment. I guess we're on the amendment right now. But I do want to say, I definitely am supportive in concept of raising the HISRAP funds. I don't know that I would be supportive of raising it $200,000. That's a lot of money, and we need it. When we're talking about that much money, we really need to put that into the context of the bigger budget and the long-range planning. And so when you relay this to HRC, make sure that they understand that that was a high cap,
Right.
and not meant to be filled.
And I'll work with Lalo on that.
Yeah. So we're going to vote on the amendment. Well, I accept the amendment. I'm assuming you do too. So we're going to vote on the motion. All in favor? Aye.
Would you state it once more? I'd like to hear what I'm
Sure.
voting on.
Not a bad idea. Kim's on the spot now. She wanted to go back and look at the video.
Okay. The funding allocation as okay.
That's okay, it'll pick you.
Councilmember Berman moved, second by Councilmember Burt, to recommend the City Council that the funding allocation as recommended by the Council for 2013 through 2015 Human Services Resource Allocation Funding Period, Attachment A, be included in the fiscal year 2015 Human Services contract budget. Second, the city manager or his designee be authorized to execute year 2 of separate 2-year contracts with 14 agencies as was approved in June 2013. And the city manager or his designee be authorized to execute year 5 of separate 6-year contracts with Albanitas and Palo Alto Community Childcare. 4, HRC evaluate increases in funding for fiscal year 2015 and bring to Finance Committee as soon as possible. One second. Okay, and then an amendment to the motion that the HRC review the funded agencies in HISRAP to identify most critical needs that were requested and unable to be allocated for fiscal year 2015, not to exceed the amount initially requested by those agencies, and to review on a program-by-program basis what the most critical and unmet needs are. Also, not to want to come with the full 580 placed as a high-end parameter, and to review on a program-by-program basis what the most critical and unmet needs are. Also to point and to include critical, new, and emerging needs of the HRC identified and critical needs identified but unable to allocate budget cycle, not to exceed the additional $200,000 that was requested and not funded. And then if the PAC comes, let's see, hold on, never mind. And an additional amount is the aggregate, allow the HRC to use their discretion, and in the recommendation how the total dollars were applied. That's all I have.
Right.
Is that right?
So there's crossover between some of those elements. I'm sure Minka can distill it in a more succinct manner, but I think it did capture everything, even though we were a little repetitive somewhat. Not contradictory, just repetitive in some places.
I think, just to really clarify this at this point, we're saying there may be some extra money in the budget this year. We're concerned that some of these very worthy recipients may have been shortchanged in such a way that we would like to replenish their request in some way. However, we're not guaranteeing that, and I want to make sure that that's on the record. And I'm pretty sure,
Right.
Councilmember Byrd, I heard you say that, to consider.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And or new needs that are identified in the supplemental.
Well, and I'm concerned about the and/or new needs. I hope we
Well,
don't
I would
see
think
any-
it would either or. It would not go above that amount, and if that amount is less, that could be, if there was an increase, it could be reduced on a percentage basis of what the HRC brings forward. But I just want to be clear, my understanding is the HRC has discretion to bring to your attention either additional distribution among the current grantees for a scope of services items that they currently brought to our attention, or identify items that are
That's correct. If the HRC believes that there are certain things that are new needs that were not identified before, that are more important than some of the other previously requested
Right.
ones, they are free to make
Yes,
those
but
recommendations.
it's an and/or, but not to exceed whatever that amount. So that might be reduced significantly based on if that allocation does take place. But what I also heard is that the HRC would have flexibility, which I don't think they would take, to reduce an allocation that's currently here, so the aggregate, the total amount doesn't go over that?
So
Or
my
did I
understanding,
miss
let
that?
me, so my understanding.
No intention of that.
Yeah.
No, I
so-
don't think they would have any.
No, what we're
They
saying.
would never do that, so.
Can I,
That's
what,
correct.
what we're saying is, for instance, and I'm using Dreamcatchers just as an example, there's a $47,000 difference between what they requested and what they received. And my understanding is what we're telling HRC is And that part of that makes up that $200,000 difference at the bottom, right, between 548 and 348. So what we're saying is that $47,000 difference, that money can be used either for Dreamcatchers or for other agencies. It doesn't just have to be for Dreamcatchers.
And Minka was concerned whether
don't
HRC could decrease, and I think our action under action item 1 precludes
They would have no
any
intention of
decrease
doing
on
that.
any
And
category.
we're not encouraging that.
No.
Yeah.
One minor clarification.
Yes.
Councilmember Burt, you had mentioned something that I don't believe was captured. Kim, you did a great job, but I think there was one thing that Councilmember Burt mentioned that I think might be helpful in this is in looking at the a revised allocation, that it be provided by the HRC in a two-tier, as a two-tier recommendation.
And it sounds like that's what they do.
Yes.
Correct.
They do that when they don't come to agreement on what can go forward. So if there's complete agreement on the HRC, they will provide only one funding distribution recommendation.
But because we are going to be considering a range of additional funding, we would like them to have it.
Of course.
To place it in two tiers of priorities.
It doesn't need to be another point. It can just say that the recommendation come back as a two-tier. Yeah.
Okay.
There are all kinds of other things I would be liking to say, but I will not.
That's for purposes of time and the fact that we have 2 long items on the agenda. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for considering that and for the possibility.
I was going to say I don't think we've actually voted yet. So
I'm sorry.
I forgot that last time too. Can we get the official votes? All in favor of that? say aye. Aye. All opposed? None. That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Your point was a very good point.
No, I seconded consider.
You seconded.
How you doing?
Oh, no, that's there. And I said, that was not necessary. So if we have to come back and be the heavy taxpayers, we'll be the heavy by giving them more money. I think we have, and hey, Commissioner, good to see you.
Good evening.
And we'll make sure that, we got you.
There's the microphone.
Oh yeah, and there's a mic at the end.
As long as the other mics are off, it should be okay.
So we're going to move on to agenda item number 4, which is the Utilities Advisory Committee recommendation that council adopt a resolution adopting the electric, gas, wastewater collection, and water utility financial plans. And would staff, does staff have a presentation?
Thank you very much, Chair Berman. Valerie Fong, Utilities Director. We have Senior Resource Planner John Aubenshine here, who will give you a brief overview. We also have Utilities Advisory Commissioner Garth Hall here.
Good evening, council members. So tonight we're bringing you the 4 financial plans for the electric, gas, wastewater collection, and water. And I think we've given you a lot of summary in the report, so I'll just summarize very quickly and we can get to any questions that you have. These financial plans, they present the plan for the next several years for each of the utilities. They also include a set of reserves management practices that are meant to replace the previously adopted management practices for a variety of reserves, and some changes to the reserve structures, all of which we've talked a little bit about at your March meeting. The financial plans have a 0% recommended rate increase, which is consistent with the recommendation that the Utilities Advisory Commission gave, and Commissioner Hall, I think, can speak a little bit more to the Utility Advisory Commission's feedback. This summarizes the rate trajectory over the next several years. I think it's worth noting that we did have in our Utilities Advisory Commission recommendation of the Utilities Advisory Commission, we had a 4% rate increase for the wastewater collection and the water utility. Some of the reasons for that were were discussed at your March meeting. And we had that there for two reasons. One was to spread some of the rate increases in the later years, spread them over more years, and lower future rate increases. And the other reason was because of the uncertainty in our capital costs over the next several years that we talked about at the March meeting. We've heard some strong feedback from the Utilities Advisory Commission that in that the rate increases, even with a 0%, that even with a 0%, the future year rate increases were still manageable, which we agree with, as well, and that having that this was an unusual opportunity to hold the line on rates for all utilities for a single year, and that holding off would give us an opportunity over this year to finish up a couple of studies that we're doing to nail down our future water utility capital costs. So, and just summarizing some of the uncertainties we have in our water utility capital costs, they're coming from two sources. We have the distribution portion of our water system and then our transmission system. The distribution system is the smaller pipes that are going out into the individual sections of the neighborhoods, while the transmission lines are the 12-inch to 24-inch pipes that serve as the backbone for our system. With respect to the distribution system, we have some uncertainty in the rate of replacement, the rate that we want to be replacing those mains, and also the cost per mile, and that's based on some uncertainty in, that's based on some of the bids that we've started to see over the last year or so. So we're doing a study on the distribution system to establish the right rate of replacement. We're also, if you flip to the next slide, we're looking at some approaches to redesign some of our main replacement projects to see if we can solicit some more competition and see some lower costs. We'll have some more information on those efforts by the next budget cycle. With respect to the water transmission system, we're planning this year to do a seismic study on some of our larger concrete pipe, and we're going to see whether sections of our system need either relining, which would be lower cost, or replacement, which is higher cost. And there are a wide range of outcomes, cost outcomes to that study. And this next slide summarizes a base case and then a high cost scenario that we ran under a 0% 2015 rate increase. And then the next slide shows those same two scenarios if we had a 4% rate increase this year. And then this last slide shows two different alternatives for the wastewater collection utility. But we are recommending no rate increases for any of these utilities this year. The next steps in if the financial plans if you recommend adoption tonight, we would take the financial plans to council with the budget for final adoption by resolution. By the end of 2014, we're expecting to finish the seismic evaluation of the transmission lines, and we should have at least preliminary results on the distribution system study. We're hoping to get that study done, but there's a lot of physical sampling of the system that needs to happen, and it may realistically take a little bit longer. And I think we can be pretty certain that by spring 2015, the distribution system study would be completed. So that's all that I have. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. And so we have one member of the public who'd like to speak to this matter. I believe Commissioner. I'm sorry. Yeah, hold on one second. Thanks, Commissioner Hall. Do you have comments that you'd like to make representing the UAC?
Thank you. Yes.
State your name, please.
My name is Garth Hall, on the Utilities Advisory Commission. The commission really appreciated the fact that staff working over with recommendations of the auditor had reviewed the reserve funding structure, simplified it, reviewed the overall funding levels, and made it a tighter definition around what they could be used. And two of the commission members actually served with staff in trying to develop that, and so it was very instructive for us to see that come to light, and we believe it's a better system, and we like that recommendation. We appreciated the fact that staff had looked at all four utilities and looked at cost trends going forward from FY15 through multiple years out, and had clearly identified the cost pressures for each, identified that for let's just talk about for the moment, for two of the utilities, that's electric and gas, that they could be sustained at least for FY15 without a rate increase. As Mr. Obishan indicated, the recommendation came to us that both water and wastewater be increased by, I believe it was, I know water is going to be increased by 4, I believe wastewater is the same. The commission did not like that idea, mainly because the explanations had fairly recently been developed based on recent cost information, and we felt that there wasn't enough time to really validate the fact that those cost trends would be sufficient to go to the ratepayers with a very clear conviction that we needed increased rates at 4%. We felt more time needed to be taken to look at that. I think staff now has identified that we can sustain going forward with a 0% increase, although those cost pressures may yet come to bear fruit with pressure for rate increases in FY16 and on. Nonetheless, we felt that that needs to happen. If it needs to happen, they need to look at those cost trends and really validate they will happen. I'm talking particularly around water. In the area of wastewater, it seems from past practice that we generally, and I think that it's convenient and maybe practical to go with rate increases for the wastewater element in sync with those for water. We didn't delve into the wastewater element as much, so the recommendation, as I now see it, is that it has also been stepped back to a 0 increase, and it held at 0. There's one element just that during the UAC meeting that concerned me a bit, and in the wastewater area, if you look at slide 8, when I noticed and brought up at the UAC meeting that there's an element of the collection cost that is treatment, which is really fairly blind to the UAC in terms of the details and specific and cost pressures on that. Although staff did have a general description of it, the UAC normally does not get exposed and get insights into those real cost pressures in the way that we do with the other utilities, elements of utilities, gas, water, and electricity. So we have, when we go, since there's a 0 rate increase recommendation here, the heat is somewhat off on this issue, but as we look forward to FY16, the guidance that the Commission would look to the Council to provide is whether, when we make a future recommendation around a wastewater collection increase, whether you want us to do that with a caveat or a footnote as to the increases recommended, taking for granted the transfer cost that's embedded in that for treatment, or would the Council prefer that the Commission receive information perhaps from Public Works or whichever department is applicable, but not the utilities since it's not theirs, as to what those elements are, so that we can validate or question and add some questions perhaps, and perhaps some clarification as to why we believe that's appropriate or not. So whether you want to just bear that in mind for future consideration, or whether you want to speak to that tonight is up to you. But that's something that happened at the commission meeting.
Thank you very much.
All right.
So I'm going to turn it to members of the public who want to speak to this item. And Mr. Herb Borak.
Thank you.
You'll have 3 minutes.
Great, thank you, Chair Berman, and good evening, committee members. Staff had included in its recommendation to the Utilities Advisory Commission a rate increase for water and wastewater, but the agenda for the Finance Committee meeting didn't include that explanation. As you can see from the minutes, only one ratepayer spoke about the proposed rate increase, and I asked her how she knew about it, and she said she read the entire staff report. That's not what the Brown Act requires to satisfy the need for the public and the press to know what's being discussed before the committee, the commission, or the council. This is also related to the process for under Proposition 218 for notifying the public and getting their votes of ratepayers of whether or not the council should approve a rate increase. It is the council's prerogative to determine the timing and the proposal that's sent out to the public, and the staff's responsibility, to plan ahead so that that action comes before the council to make on the rate paying. I did not have a time to research in the past, but I have a dim recollection that there was one rate increase past couple of years that was sent out after maybe a finance committee recommendation rather than coming to the council to determine when that Proposition 218 process should begin. By coincidence, as I understood the proposal originally from staff, that mailing on Proposition 218 would have occurred during the election campaign, where as many as 4 council members would be seeking re-election, and so that voters would be receiving information about the candidates and information about the rate increase at the same time. And by coming now to the council, you could say how wonderful the council is by not making a rate increase. What's missing from the staff report, I believe, is what was shown to the commission, and that is a comparison of the rate increases over a period of years and how they're different if you don't make a rate increase in water and wastewater this year versus if you had made part of that rate increase this time around. I don't believe that approving of financial plans that include plans for future years satisfies the requirement that a council action on initiating a Proposition 218 ratepayer approval process for future years is satisfied. That is, you would need something on your agenda where you determine that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And can I quickly go out to the city attorney's office to confirm that this agenda item has been properly noticed and that we're okay to proceed?
All right. Thank you, Chair and members of the Finance Committee. I'm Jessica Mullen from the City Attorney's Office, and I just want to confirm with you that we did in fact review the agenda titles that were submitted in connection with this, and our opinion in terms of the Brown Act requirements are that this was properly noticed in terms of listing sort of financial plan, also reserve management practices, within which our understanding and belief is that embedded in that title is the consideration of kind of the overall revenue requirement of the utility, which would also include the rates that are charged over that kind of projected time period. So from a Brown Act perspective, we feel comfortable that this was properly agendized.
Great.
And we see the rate increases, just to also clarify some of the other comments. Earlier, the rates that are embedded in this particular presentation are projected rate increases for discussion purposes as part of the plan. Were we to actually move forward with any sort of an actual rate increase, it would come back to all the requisite committees and then be noticed under Proposition 218 in accordance with that law too. So this isn't the last bite of the apple, I guess would be my point. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Jessica. Turning it over to colleagues. Any questions or comments from colleagues?
This
Vice Mayor.
if I might.
Please.
As I understand.
Are you asking me,
Yes.
Vice Mayor? I'm only hearing one. I'm only hearing one. In general, I'm hearing that staff say that they recommend 0 rate increases across all 4, but adopt the plan, including the reserve funding structures. That's all I'm hearing.
And so you're comfortable with what you're hearing from the,
I am comfortable.
that's what I wanted to hear. No, that's my question, and I think, unless there are a lot of questions about this seems fairly straightforward. Am I missing something? Can we make it more complicated?
Yes.
Always. Always.
Are you done with your questions?
Well, I guess I'm done with them then. It looks as though it's a fairly straightforward way to go forward, and perhaps I have missed the nuances of it.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Would anybody else? Councilman Burt.
Well, first, I think Mr. Borok's point, although our city attorney's office has clarified that these were done in a proper legal fashion, I think it would be beneficial in the future to lay out when it goes, for instance, to the UAC more clearly at the outset if there's a recommendation of rate increase, if that was not at the outset in the summary, to be clear on that, so that the public really has ample opportunity on that. I did have a couple questions on the presentation, and I think it actually helps inform for me some of the considerations even for the next item. John, you mentioned, if you look at slide number 5, you talked about possibility of relining versus replacement of water transmission lines, and I see above it that staff's going to re-examine its approach to designing main replacement to solicit more competition and lower costs. Can you give us a little better sense of what that's about?
I'm going to defer to Tom Marshall, our Assistant Director of Engineering.
Great.
Tom Marshall, Assistant Director of Engineering. So, I mean, there's a number of things. I think John touched on a number of issues, but we are looking at, so on the transmission line, we have into the foothills, into our reservoir storage up there, we have a concrete pipe that runs up the hill. So that's one of the issues we're looking at in terms of relining part of that. So in a seismic event, that pipe will stay intact. At this point, we don't know how much we might have to reline. It sort of depends on fault lines and where we might see breaks in that pipe. So we're going to do a study and get some recommendations on that issue of if it can be relined or whether we need to replace some of it with pipe type that's more resistant to seismic events. So.
And the second one was what was above it of or maybe that it's a restatement of what you just described. It said re-examine its approach to designing main replacement to solicit more competition and lower costs.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at it. I mean, we're using different materials now. And one of the materials we've been looking at is high-density polyethylene. We've moved to that, and we're re-examining some of those things and whether we're getting the best price using that particular pipe type. We may go back and look at using different types of pipe. Another type is PVC, but we're going to reevaluate that and make some decision on long-term availability of the system and longevity of the system and look at those pipe type materials. We think that the PE is a little more expensive on the front end, but it may provide a longer service life, so we're going to reevaluate that.
And are these subsets of what was in the preceding slide, number 4, which is the cast iron main replacement program that was begun in 1992?
Yeah, that's what we're replacing the cast iron with, is these different types of plastic pipe today.
And so how far along are we in that replacement program?
I don't have the numbers right off the top of the head, but we're pretty far along in the cast iron pipe replacement. I think if we kept at the same pace we're going now, we'd be finished with most of the cast iron around 2020, right in there. So we've done a significant portion. What we're seeing now is that the leaks have gone down considerably in the last 20 years, and so we're trying to reevaluate it and make sure we get as much life out of the system we have out there now, and they don't replace it early. So that's what we're looking at is.
Yeah, so I know that one of the things we had discussed in, I think, last year, well, when we did the benchmarking, and it comes up in this next item, is while we're in kind of the normal range on water leakage, Santa Clara is way below everybody else. And so I assume you're looking at the real trade-off of the capital investment versus the commodity loss that you have from if you don't do the more aggressive investment. Is that basically?
Well, I think that's it. I think it's sort of a risk and reliability assessment. You don't lose that much water, gets lost in the pipes, but it's a reliability and risk, and how much risk you want to take and how much reliability we want to provide on the system, and we're balancing that with the capital costs. And so that's what we're going to have the study do, is go back and rebalance some of those issues for us.
You say we don't lose that much water. I don't, maybe we'll have it in the next item, but it was pretty appreciable in the difference between.
I think there's a difference between lost water and unaccounted for water.
Okay.
That's a completely different thing.
Well, then I'll look forward to that explanation, maybe in the next item. All right. And that covers my questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Holman?
Yes, just a couple. One's a comment. It's sort of to parrot, but just maybe emphasize Councilmember Burt's comment in response to Herb Borak's comments. There is and to the city attorney. So there is a required and minimal description that's necessary on items. But I think the more that we can be forthcoming in what an item is about, the more we're likely to capture the interest and attention of members of the public. So, like I said, for instance, this doesn't mention even the reserves adjustments, or let alone rate changes or such. So, more information is better, within reason, but certainly to hit the high points would be advised and appreciated. One of the questions that I had, Tom, you touched on. So the sunset of replacements you thought would be about 2020. And the projected rate adjustments go through 2019. So because of, would you like to say something first? Or?
Well, I'd say the replacements don't sunset. That's just the cast iron. There's another group of pipes that are going to have to be replaced after the cast iron. So.
And of course, maintenance is always an ongoing thing. But I was wondering if there's any way, now this is going out a few years, but I was just wondering if there's any way, because a lot of our rates are based on, at this point in time, and based on our investment in infrastructure. Two questions. One is, maybe one of them goes to the next item. I think maybe go to that. Is there any way to project, like after 2019 or 2020, how the rates might be going down because significant investment's been made? Yeah. Okay, that's a question for John, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the public would want to know, okay, we're doing this because of the investment, so at what point in time do we level off or start going down at?
So I think there is a misconception that the higher spending right now is a short-term temporary thing until we get over this hump, and that there are two major infrastructure investments going on. One is in our own system, and one is in the Hetch Hetchy system. Right. The investment in the Hetch Hetchy system is one of the largest overhauls of a water system, I think, that in the entire U.S. And it's not something that you can just fund over a few years. What's actually going on is the whole project is being funded by debt, and that debt is being issued over the course of several years. By 2020, most of the debt associated with this project will have been issued, which is why the rates level off at that point, which is why we showed the 7-year projection. But after that, you can expect to see the same level of rates going onward. You just won't see the increases that you've seen in the last few years. As far as our capital spending goes, that's been pretty stable, and we would expect that to, depending on the results of the study, either increase a little bit or decrease a little bit. But we maintain a level of investment that we need to replace our system over the lifetime of the pipes. And so we expect that to stay pretty constant ongoing.
Okay, and I'm not sure, as I was kind of mumphing around here, I'm not quite sure if this is a question for this item or the next one. You know, what the rates are, stop me if it's for the next item. The cost of delivery of the utility, of the water in this case, I think it is the next one. We are very, geographically, we're spread out more than some of the other communities that we're compared to. So if it's cost of service that we can base our rates on, why do we not charge a higher rate to some of the further reaches in our system?
Well,
so I think we've had this question a couple of times.
Tell me if that belongs in the next item instead of this one.
No, it's okay. This is, I mean, there is a lot of, they're overlapping. So we looked at that, and we looked at that with our last cost of service study, which was before I was managing the rates, and so I'm not 100% sure why the consultant found that there wasn't a specific basis for it. But the thing about the pipes that go out to the far reaches, and Tom could speak to this a little bit more, is that one of the major reasons for having those pipes is that it goes to the reservoirs up in the foothills that help maintain pressure during maintain pressure on our system during an emergency. Fire in particular. Yeah, Tom can. I'll defer to Tom.
Yeah, so the reservoirs in the foothills, they're there for the case we get, at some point, God forbid we get cut off from Hetch Hetchy or something, we need fire protection on the system, and those reservoirs are the fire protection. So like he was mentioning, those pipes running up the hill, the whole system is getting benefit because it's providing fire protection to the entire city when we, in an event where we might lose a Hetch Hetchy supply.
And that is, and so that is commingled with the feeding of the reservoirs. That is commingled with the delivery system on a day-to-day basis for the utility users in the further reaches?
That's correct. I mean, the water every day, we have to cycle the water through the foothills on a daily basis to keep the water fresh in there so we can use it as potable water. So that entire system, I mean, we use it daily just to maintain potable water in the foothills, and so it's available during an event where we need fire protection.
Okay, all right, thank you. Don't think I have any other questions.
Thank you. And that last one was a good one that could have gone in either one, and I was going to ask in the next one, so we have our answer now. Okay. And I won't have to ask it. So I just want to reiterate or reconfirm with John what you'd said about the increases to water rates and the difference between the Hetch Hetchy infrastructure improvements and our local infrastructure improvements. And you can kind of see this on slide 6. So we're not going to get a dip down in rates, but they will level off. Am I correct in that?
That's right.
One, and so you kind of see that in 2021 projected. We've got increases for 5 years there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and then I mean I'm not saying that they won't ever increase, but that's when a certain amount of the infrastructure increases will end. And the continuous debt financed increase will continue for 30 years or however long the debt financing goes, but things should kind of stable out at that point.
That's right.
Okay, which is something that we can all look forward to. So I don't, I'm happy to see staff and the UAC come to agreement on this and don't have any other particular questions above and beyond what's been asked.
So as we look at the 2021 projection of it leveling off, that seems to indicate that the increases are not occurring because of our infrastructure maintenance program or replacement program, but the Hetch Hetchy. If the Hetch Hetchy's leveling off at that time and the total rate anticipation levels off, is that roughly correct?
That's right. But again, we have the uncertainty around our own infrastructure program as well. So,
what this, we don't need to decide this tonight, but as we look forward on the rates for 2016 through 2020, where our ratepayers under this scenario would see about a 40% increase in rates over that period. One of the things that we may want to ask ourselves is if we did a reasonable slight slowdown in the pace of our own infrastructure replacement over that period, would that place us in any jeopardy? And so that we push a little bit of that out into the 2021 through 2025 period, so that we don't have such a steep set of increases in the next 5 years, and instead it makes it more steady. And I'm not looking for an answer tonight because I know you really don't have the answer either to what our costs are going to be for our own and what would be the consequence of if we push that out a bit. But we have a year to be looking at that, and I just wanted to make sure we were including that consideration.
Great. Yes, you can.
So moved.
I'm assuming that's the staff recommendation.
That is the staff recommendation.
I will second that. This is the one I don't have. That the staff recommendation that the Finance Committee recommend that Council adopt a resolution, Attachment A, adopting the electric, gas, wastewater collection, and water financial plans, Attachments B, C, D, and E, respectively. Would you like to speak to your motion? Neither me nor my second. Any questions or comments?
I think it's worthwhile even including in the motion that what that is no rate increases for any of our utilities for 2015. It's pretty consequential to just gloss over.
Very, very good point that hopefully gets the proper attention it deserves.
Why not included in the motion?
Would any other comments to the motion? No. All in favor? Aye. That passes unanimously, and can go to council on consent, even though it should get a whole lot of attention for the accomplishment and significance that it is. Thank you. So moving on to item number 5 on our agenda, discussion of water utility benchmarking studies and future work plan.
So really, this is not an action item. It is really a discussion item, and we're simply letting you know that we will be doing more studies, and any input you want to give us on what we should be looking at going forward would be greatly appreciated.
This is an outstanding item that you had asked staff to come back with more information as well. So we'll be, after this discussion, we've met your request to come back with it.
You're off the hook.
So I thank you, Lalo, and thank you, Val. I wanted to, I think one reason that we want to have this discussion tonight is because there was only a very limited opportunity, I think, when this item was requested by the Finance Committee last time around to really talk about the objectives for this, for what sorts of information you're looking for from us. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to bring forward some of the information, some of the benchmarking studies that we've done in the past and just recently, and then let you know what our plan, what questions we're going to try and answer over the next several months, and see if that's getting at some of the questions that you had in your May discussion. And I know this was a previous Finance Committee, and so I think this is also an opportunity to add our new Finance Committee members' input to the discussion. So we've given you a little summary of 2 benchmarking studies that we've done over the last few years. The first was a 2010, a benchmarking study that concluded in 2010. We hired consultants, I think in response probably to very similar questions to the ones that were raised last May. And the questions in the report are in the staff report, but just running through some of the conclusions that they came to. They focused on, this study went out and looked at 6 comparison agencies, and they looked at publicly available information and then also called staff members at those utilities and conducted some interviews to get more detail. They concluded that because Palo Alto's facilities are substantially older than neighboring agencies, and I actually have a couple of backup slides that illustrate this if you're interested, there is a higher replacement cost for those facilities and also higher O&M. The consultant also talked about the characteristics of our service territory, the fact that we are more spread out, have some hillier terrain, which means more pressure zones to maintain, and also more seasonal variation. These require some higher level of operating capability and higher expenses. The consultant also talked about a higher quality of service, lower number of outages and complaints than some of the other agencies surveyed. The next survey, you just would have just received it, I believe, your most recent meeting. This was the SAIC LADOS organizational assessment, and this was focused on all of our utilities and the utilities department organization as a whole, but one component was a benchmarking study, benchmarking the water utility against, and several of the other utilities, against several other utilities nationwide. Some of the comments from this study, this study also found higher O&M expense, also explained this due to, as a result of older infrastructure. They did mention that there were more FTE than some per unit of water delivered than some of the other utilities out there. But one of the things that we do is directly allocate administrative FTE to our water fund. That's something that other utilities often handle with an indirect allocation. So they cautioned about that particular measure. And then we've also started doing some analysis. Get to the next slide. And so there were questions last May about both costs and per capita consumption. So we took a look at the FY12 BOSCA annual survey and also the FY 2012 financial statements for some of our comparison cities. And when we looked at consumption and analyzed that a little bit, we found that yes, Palo Alto residents do have higher water use per capita than other BOSCA agencies, but we also found that there were some climate and property characteristics that could explain a lot of the higher per capita use. We also found the same thing as the previous two studies, that our older system results in higher O&M and CIP expenses than other agencies, and also that we're more spread out. One of the impacts of this that we figured out is that when you're more spread out, you have it takes more pipe to deliver the same number of units of water, and therefore you're spreading those maintenance expenses out over fewer units of water, which leads to higher rates. So we presented our preliminary analysis to the Utilities Advisory Commission. They recommended that we complete, a more in-depth analysis before coming back and talking to them and talking to you. But before we go into any more depth, we wanted to talk to you a little bit and make sure that we are covering all the topics that that we're addressing addressing what you're interested in. The topics that we're planning to investigate this summer, we're going to do a bit more in-depth review of some of our neighboring cities' data, ideally go back a few years. And some of the topics we're going to investigate, one of the very clear questions I think last May was, we know that the cost of Hetch Hetchy water is a little bit higher, and that's resulting in higher rates than some other agencies. But some of our comparison agencies also use Hetch Hetchy water, and so I think the question was, what's our cost profile? Why are our costs higher than those other agencies that are using the same water sources? So we'll look at a variety of costs. And then there's the question of what's the value that customers are getting for the additional money that they're paying. And I think that's an important question to ask, and it's something that previous benchmarking studies have found that we, in some ways, we may be delivering a higher level of service. And then ideally, we take a look at how costs need to change for rates to become competitive. It may or may not be trade-offs that we would ever be willing to make, but that's where the value discussion comes in. And I just want to provide one caveat that finding out this information is going to be dependent in part on getting some cooperation from neighboring agencies. A lot of this information is not found in public documents. It's going to require a little bit of analysis. And so there's going to be some effort and some outreach. It will take some staff time to do this. And I think that's another very important reason to make sure that we're zeroing in on exactly the things that you're interested in hearing about. So with that, I'll give you the opportunity to ask any questions that you have and give us any comments you have.
Great. And speaking of opportunities, I want to give Commissioner Hall an opportunity to say any comments he's got.
Thank you. Yes, the Commission did listen with great interest and have a pretty lengthy discussion at the presentation. I think it was at the January meeting, if I'm not mistaken. And we agree with the next steps identified in slide number 5. Yes. I think that those are the right topics to look at. We agree with staff that they're nominally halfway through a very important exercise. We're very conscious, and that actually entered in some of the Commission's deliberations or sensitivity related to the prior item, and that is that we are well known as a high unit cost utility for water. And since I work for another water utility, I know that all utilities have pressure from their ratepayers and compare one another fervently. And so Palo Alto knows it's high, and everybody who is not that high looks at Palo Alto with some questions about why its rates are so high. We ourselves in Palo Alto are doing that also, and I think these steps will pursue that. So I do agree that it's going to take some work for staff, because the easy lifting has been done by taking publicly available documents, and the next step is more labor intensive. But I believe substantive comparisons along the lines of these bullets here will produce what we need to hear.
Great, thank you very much. Turning it over to colleagues.
I've gone first 3 times, so I'm happy to.
Vice Mayor went first last time, I thought.
I actually did.
Yeah. Although I guess, have we had 5 items? We have, so you might have gone first the first 3.
Okay, all right, so,
You don't have to.
yeah, it's okay. I guess, Palo Alto has its own utilities. Not every other city does, of course. But I was interested in the comparison cities that are at the bottom of page 2, and it lists Redwood City, Mountain View, Milpitas, Hayward, Santa Clara, and California Water Service Company's Bear Gulch District. So, to my knowledge, every one of those entities is larger than Palo Alto in terms of population. So it sort of seems like, if you just take it on that basis, it seems like we're justifying our rates by saying, like, we don't have the greatest economy of scale that they do, but we're not comparing ourselves to another utility that has a comparable population. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think what we'd love to do is find a utility that has the exact same characteristics as Palo Alto. Unfortunately, every utility is a little bit different. These utilities over the years are the ones that we found are the closest comparators to Palo Alto, and so that's why we've settled on these.
And I can appreciate that, but but you understand too why it sort of seems like we're picking. If we use this one as justification, it's like we're making our own argument to suit our own purpose.
Well,
you know what I'm saying?
I think economies of scale may factor. They're only one. It certainly wasn't the only factor listed out in any of these benchmarking studies. So, while I hear the concern. I think there are a lot of very valid ways that we can compare ourselves to these other utilities and get some good insights.
I guess then for me, Jack, to be clearer for this point, it would be, the economy of scales. The economy of scale comment would be measured or tempered by the fact that these are larger population entities. So, just to make it a little bit clearer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if I hear what you're saying, you're suggesting that the comment be tempered by the fact that the comparison cities are larger.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So, because everybody might not know that.
Okay.
So, okay, that would be helpful. Then we talked about that one. Okay, so this one I didn't understand here, where number 4 on page 3 is Palo Alto experiences more seasonal variation in its demand, which requires a higher level of operating capability. We have a different seasonal demand than do Redwood City, Mountain View, Milpitas, Hayward, Santa Clara?
We tend to have larger lot sizes in Palo Alto, which means more irrigation use, which is much more seasonal.
Well, that's mentioned. That isn't clear by number 4. It makes it sound like, for me anyway, it seems like seasonal variation means that we have longer hot spells or something like that. Where you talk about lot size is, I think, in the presentation this evening, or somewhere else you talked about lot size. That makes more sense to me. But seasonal variation doesn't seem like a reasonable, rational argument to me when we're looking at these comparison utilities.
I think there's a lot of hidden information in those words, seasonal variation, and I've tried to quote from the original benchmarking studies so as not to add too much commentary in it. But I think that what seasonal variation what goes into seasonal variation is larger lot sizes, slightly warmer and drier microclimate than the rest of the BOSC agencies as a whole, although I think our comparison cities tend to be a little bit closer to us and have a similar climate. And the larger, and I think I mentioned the larger lot sizes, and all of that leads to more and more intensive irrigation, which results in the seasonal variation. And I think that probably could be spelled out a little better.
It would, to be reasonable and rational, to me, it seems like it should be. Also, it'd be good to understand what the cost comparisons are. You know, we buy our water from Hetch Hetchy. What is the comparison of entities that purchase our water from Santa Clara Valley Water District? That would be helpful to know. Yes, both here and in the presentation tonight, it's like the more FTEs per unit of water delivered. I appreciate these questions going forward as next steps. And that one is also of interest to me because we have more FTEs per unit of water. That's a fact, as stated here. Would our service suffer if we had fewer FTEs? I guess that's a question that that I don't see here on the next steps and questions. So, and I think it's a reasonable question. There's no doubt that we deliver very good utility services, including water. So, again, what would be the threshold for where would we start to see a change? Do we have the right number to still be able to deliver the best service? Salary and benefit costs compared to other BOSCA agencies. We've done a fair amount of that, so I'm interested in looking at, you know, in our wage and salary comparisons, you know, as part of negotiations. So I'm interested in seeing how this one comes back. And I think those cover. Oh, yeah. There was one other one that was on page 5 in the staff report. That is how are costs allocated between residential and non-residential customer classes for comparable BOSCA agencies and what drives those allocations. I think that would be also an important question to ask as a part of next steps. The first bullet on the presentation talks about cost comparison of the BOSCA agencies, but I don't see it as it relates to allocation. And maybe it's implied but not implicit.
Yeah, it is a shorthand. I mean,
okay.
To the extent that information's available.
I don't read utility shorthand very well.
No, it's okay. To the extent that the information's available, sometimes that information isn't necessarily available, but we.
So can I say, when you refer to things missing out of the presentation, our attempt was just to give you a very broad brush overview with the presentation. Clearly, we mentioned it in the report. That is one of the questions we intend to.
Okay, all right, very good. So it's consistent then, it's just that this is the shorthand for it. Okay, very good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Burt.
Well, first, a couple follow-ups to Councilmember Holman's questions. Is it the intention that, for instance, where we have under these next steps, we talk about, under the first bullet, looking at allocated overhead. Is that to take this kind of subject area that says we have more FTEs per gallon delivered, and then we qualify that, and we said, but a lot of the other cities don't have their administration and service as directly allocated. Are you going to break that out and say, well, how much does that matter? Is that the intention of that first bullet?
That's ideal. I mean, again, caveat all of this to the extent that information's available.
Right. But that's the intent. Okay, good. And then I'm trying to remember whether it was which report, whether it was the 2010 report that, so if we look at packet page 229 down at the bottom, it says Palo Alto's fraction of lost and unaccounted for water is in line with the industry average of 8 to 9%, but Santa Clara's is extremely low and could partly explain their low water rates. And Tom had started to speak to that before. I guess he's gone now, but that there was a difference between leakage and the unaccounted for. Nevertheless, those things combined in the 2010 benchmark study said, you know, that could be significant.
It could make some difference, but it's not a. I wouldn't call it a single. I mean, it's one of many factors. Right,
but that's what we're looking at. I don't think we're going to find anything here that's a single factor that's going to explain the whole difference. If theirs was, I think, just if I recall correctly, something like 1 or 2%, that was, and they were the outlier among all the agencies. Then that would be, say, 6 or 7% of the commodity cost being lower, which is what the commodities, what, about half of our cost? Is that what it is?
It'll by 2020 it'll be about
Okay,
there.
so then it's like 3 to 4% of our total cost. That's not insignificant. That's of our total cost, and it might be out of the difference in cost. It might be 10% of the difference in cost. So
I think you also always have to be careful, especially with outliers, about measurement quality. You always have to wonder about that.
Okay.
I think we just concede we have some of the same questions as you do, and that's certainly something we want to look at.
Okay. And I think in our last discussion, part of it was going to be really engaging with them and saying, how are you doing this? And if they come up and say, we don't know, then maybe it is a measurement issue.
And
if
this
they
is
say,
where
no, we've got this real systematic program, and we used to be where you are, and we worked it and worked it and got to where we are, and here's what it cost us in capital investment to get there, which is a trade-off versus the commodity, then everything's transparent and we get to make some good decisions. Okay. I also, we have coming back up a revisitation of the prospective expansion of our recycled water supply. And not only what we had looked at putting the pipe up for irrigation up Page Mill for the research park, but now we have neighboring agencies that are even possibly interested in buying that water for their irrigation, and especially now that we have our total dissolved solids down in a range that looks attractive. This is it's more attractive water, and since we last looked at this, the cost of our water has gone up enormously, and it's scheduled to go up a lot more. So my assumption is that the economics of recycling our wastewater for irrigation have improved drastically, or have already improved drastically, and will become much more economical by 2020. Is that in any way going to be looked at as part of not just why we're more expensive now, but how we can bridge the gap? And so our solutions may not be mimicking everybody else, but it may be doing certain things different from some.
We can certainly look at it. I probably don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I'm not sure, even with the increase in our water commodity costs and the decrease in the total dissolved solids from the plant, I'm not sure that a recycled water project is financially viable on its own. I do think it still very much relies on grants.
Well, we've just had the
something we'll look at.
The Santa Clara Valley Water district volunteer to participate with us in our capital program. So that's the other new ingredient. So it's not just grants, but it's partners. And I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you those, if you add capital subsidy from the water district and much higher commodity costs, whatever the economics were 5 years ago, they're going to be way different in 2020 and with those two different scenarios. And I don't know the answer, but I'm very anxious to hear the answer. And I don't think our staff yet knows the answer. I want to make sure we're looking at it. Okay. So then we had this discussion about in the hillside that we have, it's more spread out and more pressure zones. But in the last item, we brought up this issue, and we were told the answer is that we got to hold that water supply up there for emergency measures either way. And I'm not hearing a clear explanation of how much of our expenses are related to the actual supplying of water to that spread out service area, which we've said in the report is one of the reasons that our costs are higher. And then when we try and zero in on that, we're told, no, we got to hold that water up there anyway, end of story. That doesn't add up. And I'm looking for a more clear explanation of the respective cost impacts of what's fixed related to our need to have that storage for emergency supply water pressures and volumes versus what is really to serve this spread out area that our own report says is one of our main cost drivers of why we have higher costs. And every time we try to zero in on that, we're told it's because we got to store this water anyway. If that's the case, then it ought to be removed as a reason for why our costs are higher. We ought to say our costs are higher because we store water for emergencies and others don't. I haven't seen that comparison either. So, and I'm seeing the director say that that's not necessarily the case. So I think we need to have a better and more transparent explanation for that on that area. One of the things that I saw got repeated in this staff report on packet page 223 is the table that we got from the SAIC study, which I was hoping we wouldn't see a repetition of this form of presentation again. It was criticized because higher revenue per million gallons delivered being better than average is not a good thing. Net income per revenue dollar, maybe it is. Millions of gallons per day delivered per FTE, we've talked about that quite a bit. It says worse than average. Absent these additional explanations, when we compare it, say, to Santa Clara, it's a lot fewer gallons delivered per FTE. So I understand that they, and we had the consultant at the Finance Committee when this was presented, but I'm uncomfortable with this showing up in the way it's being presented in staff reports again, so that the casual reader might misread this and think that's a good thing to brag about. Sorry, I'm just looking at my other notes here and making sure I've covered everything. Well, the other thing that, at the bottom of 223, we talked about going back to, this is one of the topics I hit on the last item, but in 1990 we had the assessment of the infrastructure costs, and we accelerated main replacement, our main replacement program. Our rates went up as a result. But what we heard tonight is that acceleration will continue indefinitely. because once we've gone from the mains, we have other system replacement requirements. So is it really true that we had just, as of 1990, we had a system that was old enough that we had an unfunded backlog of system deterioration for an older system? Or are we actually partly, we were underfunding our ongoing sustainable need, and we're in a catch-up mode? Because also it's important to remember that we've got two Palo Altos here in terms of the age of our city. We've got North Palo Alto and South Palo Alto, roughly. South Palo Alto is like many of these other communities. It was built in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And that's not the same situation as North Palo Alto's piping age. So I'd like to understand better what is really happening in that long-term infrastructure investment. Is it that we're spending at a rate that is what we'll need to continue to spend on an ongoing basis, or are we partly in a catch-up mode? We certainly know that we went through this with streets, where we were underfunding our street repair. We're presently actually overfunding it beyond what our ongoing need will be. We're in a catch-up mode. Probably from what you're saying, it's not that extreme of a difference, but I'm still suspecting we may be in the process of a catch-up, and it's not indefinite at this capital funding pace. And John, did you have something you want to comment on it?
Say that's something the study that we're doing on the distribution system is going to address that appropriate rate of replacement.
Okay, good, because earlier comments implied that we actually had the answer already, and I was not sure that we really had studied that. In each of these areas, whether, when we talk about the seasonality and being attributable to our irrigation, if we just make claims kind of in a categorical way without any references to say, look, here's our benchmark cities, and we took 2 of them, and in fact, we do have this percentage larger lot sizes, which, we're not going to count the foothills principally because they're not irrigating their natural area and things like that. So it has to be adjusted properly. Then it gets meaningful. But, it's sort of in the same category as when we said, well, we count administration and service and they don't. We said, well, what's the impact of that? And hopefully that's all going to burrow down more. Finally, this question about comparing other cities that have a better economy of scale. I really don't understand why we don't have a Menlo Park or a San Carlos within that mix. They're Hetch Hetchy water. They have a lot of similarities to us. Yes, we're larger than them, just as some of these other districts are larger than us. Is there some reason that they're not included?
We did include Menlo Park in the 2010 benchmarking study.
Okay. And will they be in this next evaluation? Because I thought I remembered something about that, and they're not in a lot of the tables, so they're somewhere in there. But, oh no, I'm not looking at the 2010 one right now in depth, that's right. We have too many studies. I'm mixing them up. So are we going to include them in this current one? And how did we shape up to them in 2010?
I'd have to look at the study to see the details about us versus Menlo Park. There are a lot of tables in the back, and it's different on a whole variety of.
I didn't get to burrow into it, but
yeah.
My general recollection is we're higher than them too, and yet we have better economy of scale. There may be other reasons, but we need to basically, once again, not make a claim and that's kind of a generalized claim without really breaking that down and saying, here's our best estimate of the degree that that has an impact. Okay, I think that covers everything I had.
Please, Commissioner.
May I make a comment?
Of course.
I think one of the factors to embed or to dive into a little bit related to the pipeline replacement program, you brought that up about 5 minutes ago. I think that's really fruitful. My impression is that Palo Alto is more advanced than many other utilities, including my own, in terms of its pipeline replacement programs as they age. There is a general consensus amongst water utility professionals across the state, if not nationwide, that they have neglected their replacement programs. And so I think that when we look at what we've done and we get into the benchmarking mode, I think it would be helpful to have some kind of assessment of where are they and where have they been in terms of their replacement, because that is a very, very large part of the cost. And by the way, many of the other utilities use bond financing for their capital programs. Even in a replacement program, there are assets that are treated with financing and not largely cash funded as we do here. And I'm thinking that it's very comfortable as a resident here to see that we don't continually leverage ourselves into higher stratospheres on our utilities. And so I'm not advocating that we go into that, but there's a difference in terms of how that translates into the benchmarking calculations.
And that line replacement, the value that we have, this goes into one of the things that we were talking about, is if we're doing that investment and it has real value, we've got to be able to convey that value to the community. Because if the ratepayers are paying a premium, and it's kind of to most ratepayers, it's a hidden value, then what we get is the consequence, which is the higher rate, with an underappreciation of what they get for that. And I don't think that we really, those of you who are responsible for assuring that we have an excellent quality system, you live and breathe the importance of doing that. The ratepayers really just see water coming out of the tap, or it's brown or it's clear or whatever. And so we have to figure out how we can convey that value in a meaningful way, and so that it's really understood as a community choice.
Great. Okay. Good discussion. I don't have much to add to it at this point. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, let me ask one question. Quick question. Because it's going to bother me if I don't ask it. Which is what, and it might have been answered when I stepped out for a minute, but what Hayward outer versus Hayward inner, is that, I mean, essentially kind of what we're talking about here in terms of, I mean, they have a more concentrated population in a smaller geographic? No, not at all. What is that then?
When water utilities sell outside of their boundaries, there's a different set of rules about, and so where Hayward is essentially acting like a private water seller to people outside of their service territory, they're charging higher rates.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Thank you. Now I don't have anything else. So I think that wraps up that agenda item, and I don't have my agenda right in front of me, but yes, future meetings and agendas. Perfect. Thank you, guys.
The next meeting for the Finance Committee is Tuesday, May 6th. We have the following items on the tentative agenda: the audit of the solid waste program from the auditor's office. That's on the billing of the refuse. Emergency responders, first responder fees for the fire department. The utilities department is bringing you a recommendation to adopt a resolution for up to 60,000 megawatts. And then we're coming back with the development impact fees as the council directed us to do with the budget hearings.
Thanks.
What I wanted to point out was that if there's any of you, and I think a couple of you have mentioned that you had some conflict, if you do, if you let the chair and myself know, that would be great, because we need 3 of you to be in attendance to have a quorum. If there's not 3, then we need to check in with the mayor, see if she can step in or reschedule the meeting. There was one meeting, and you will notice it's right after the May 20th, that's to be scheduled. That was originally the 2nd of May, but that's no longer a night we can do. We need to reschedule. There's some conflict. So we're proposing May 27th to you. Not sure if that is available. If not, then we'll poll you. But that would be our proposal to you. Keep in mind that that is the day after Memorial Day, in case you're that we have planned for Memorial Day weekend. It would be that Tuesday night. And everything else would stay as proposed for now. And so we just request that you give us feedback on the dates, see if you have any conflicts on any of them, and then if you can make the 27th be the replacement for the one labeled to be scheduled.
Okay. And we already had one planned for the 29th.
Correct.
Do people need a little time to consider these proposals, these options? So why don't will you send out an email in so we cancel the 22nd because of city manager and a council member who can't be there, and are proposing the 27th as a possibility, which is the day after Memorial Day. Is that what you said? And if that doesn't work for folks, then we can poll to find another option.
The 27th?
That'll happen again in 4 years. Come on, what's the? I hope. Knock on wood.
I'm pretty sure that's the date. Okay.
Graduation's on Tuesday.
We'll poll you online then. Yeah.
Perfect.
And what did you say the next date of the next finance committee meeting is?
May 6th.
Yeah.
Could,
Which is not a budget one. It's just a typical finance.
oh, okay, so this is, okay,
This is-
May
yeah,
6th.
exactly.
Okay, these are
Just the
finance,
budget.
but May 6th.
Just so it makes a little sense here. The city.
So send it the email out in the morning, and folks can get a chance to look at their calendars.
So on Monday, May 5th, the city manager will present to you his proposed budget and hand it to you that night. So the idea was not to have a meeting that week, so you'd have at least a week to review the budget.
Not of a budget meeting.
Correct.
We're having a finance committee meeting, but not a budget meeting.
Thank you
Yeah.
for that clarification.
Yeah.
And so that way it gives you an opportunity to read the document.
And the meeting of the 6th is a necessary meeting?
Yes, because
Topics?
the auditor wants to make sure that they put the audit in front of you, because there's a timing requirement that you may recall from the inventory, that there's a certain amount of time for that office.
And those were the topics that you just mentioned a minute ago, right?
Correct. The development impact fee, so that's important too, because the council gave us the direction to come back in May.
Yeah.
Come back to you and then go back to the council.
Yeah.
Are there other non-budget meetings in May of the finance committee?
Not at
Better not be.
Okay.
We have no plans for one at this point.
Okay, so here's a request that I have, and I talked earlier about this probably a couple of weeks ago with the chair, is like for this meeting, and it wasn't so bad because we didn't have a council meeting yesterday or last night, but let's just say on 5/6, for instance, just use that as an example. If we don't have a finance committee meeting for that span of time, I know this isn't the only thing you do is prep for these meetings, but if we could get those packets earlier instead of at the same time we get the council packet, it would be really, really helpful, because then we're looking at, you know, a council packet like this and a finance committee packet like this, and you have to do it all.
So what I can tell you is that the city manager has
so much.
Do you have any idea when he's planning to roll that
Don't
puppy
tell us
out?
June, okay?
I don't, because
Yeah.
he was trying to get feedback from us and work out on some tentative timelines, and I think taking that feedback.
Great.
Okay, super.
So you'll send us a follow-up email
Sure will.
on that 22nd, 27th meeting. Any other questions? Nope. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.